domestic abuse. The Pathfinder model provides expert support to victims and doubles the proportion of children seen by social workers, and a quarter of all relevant cases will follow this model by January, and we're determined to go further.
Sarah Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister clearly knows that the backlog in the family courts is causing real distress. I have one family who've waited over a year for a court hearing. A year is a long time for a child, and we know others are waiting even longer. So can the Minister share what specific measures she's taking to ensure cases involving children and vulnerable families are resolved more quickly?
Minister.
No, I welcome that question, and the Honourable Lady is right. The delays in our family court are untenable, and families, children particularly, are waiting too long for resolution. It's why we're determined to go further by rolling out our Pathfinder model to ensure a child-centric approach to the family court. She will be aware that we are determined to repeal the issue of parental involvement through our Victims in Courts bill that's going through currently. We're also determined to really get to grips with our family court. But if the Honourable Lady writes to me with that specific case in mind, I'll make sure she gets a full response.
Question 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all misogyny is abhorrent, but we know that online misogyny is becoming increasingly pervasive. We have criminalised the creation of intimate deepfakes without consent, and we are creating new offences in the Crime and Policing Bill, which will mean perpetrators who take intimate image without consent will face up to 2 years in prison, and we will be going further to ensure that we stamp out misogyny everywhere it is, online or in the real world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Dr. Sam Rice, has set up a grassroots charity called Kids for Now, which supports parents who want to delay smartphones for their children. There is much evidence to support this approach. For example, Ofsted has found that 80% of teenage girls are put under pressure to provide sexual images of themselves, which often end up online. Does the Minister agree with me that the effect that online misogyny has on children must be tackled?
Minister.
I totally agree with my honourable friend. Online misogyny radicalises our boys, it pressures our girls, it fuels harmful attitudes, and it must be tackled in order to protect all of our children. The government is acting through tougher laws. The Online Safety Act and our upcoming Violence Against Women and Girls strategy will protect children from harm online. Prevention, Mr. Speaker, is fundamental here. So we are supporting schools to teach children about respect, consent and healthy relationships. And I can just inform the House that the Secretary of State for Education is in Australia right now, learning about the model over there to see how we can best learn lessons from that and apply them here.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for that answer. Minister, quite clear across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, it's important we all work together. Indeed, it should take a stage further. We should also be working with the Republic of Ireland to ensure that they and us can work together to combat this. So can I ask the Minister a very quick question in relation to how we can do it better together in this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? What discussions has the Minister had with the Northern Ireland Assembly and the relevant Minister? Thanks so much.
No, I welcome that question from the honourable gentleman. He will know that these crimes, and especially online crimes around misogyny, have no borders. They do not act in a silo, and it is going to take all of us to tackle that, whether we are here in England and Wales jurisdiction of the criminal justice system or across our devolved counterparts in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and, as he states, in the Republic of Ireland too. We regularly meet with our counterparts to discuss these issues, and there is no stone unturned when it comes to tackling misogyny.
Sir Julian Smith.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Mediation saves people time, money and stress. It can also help reduce court delays and save the taxpayer money. Mandatory mediation for small money claims is now well integrated into the county court process, and it's delivering real results in terms of time savings and cost savings too.
Sir Julian.
Time pressure is one of the best routes to encourage ADR, as the Minister knows, but in the commercial court in 2024, the median time to judgment was 786 days. The UK law sector is up against huge pressures from Singapore and from the Middle East, who are offering 6 months to judgment and 6 months for appeal. Can I urge ministers to look at the competitive challenges facing UK law against this tough international competition?
Minister.
He raises a really good point. Those sorts of delays are depriving our businesses of productivity and of the ability to resolve these disputes sooner. The successes we are seeing on small money claims under £10,000, which tend to affect small and medium-sized enterprises, shows the progress that can be made. The other thing I would point him to is the launch of our English law panel, which is looking at that issue of competitiveness with other jurisdictions.
Liz McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker, before entering this House, I was an employment solicitor, and I saw the impact that judicial mediation had in our employment tribunals. Would the Minister agree to meet with me to discuss the role of expanding judicial mediation could have on bringing down the backlog in our employment tribunals?
Minister.
I welcome the honourable member's experience in this area, and I'd be happy to meet with him to discuss that very important subject.
Mr. Speaker.
The HMPPS Prisoner Escort and Custody Services team makes sure Serco meets its contract obligations and takes action when they fall short. Delays at Bournemouth courts are often caused by issues across the wider criminal justice system, and the contract management team continues to work closely with partners to resolve problems and improve service delivery.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We must ensure that courts like Bournemouth aren't being kept idle at a cost of thousands of taxpayers' pounds every day. After all, we have a backlog that we've got to clear thanks to the party opposite. Bournemouth piloted the Pathfinder model and it wants to do more, but it is being held back by private contractors like Serco. So will the government reconsider its approach, and will it consider alternative ways to deliver prisoners to court on time, thereby saving the taxpayer valuable money?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the shocking situation in our Crown Courts and our civil courts that this government inherited from the party opposite. We must take action, and that's why my honourable friend, the Minister for Courts, will be setting out a wide-ranging package which will get a grip of the backlog and make sure our criminal justice system is fit for the future.
Andrew Rossell.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, prison security is a top priority, and we constantly update our countermeasures to keep pace with criminals who try to undermine them. This year, the government is investing over £40 million in physical security. This includes £10 million on anti-drone measures. Prisons also have X-ray body scanners, airport-style enhanced gate security and X-ray baggage scanners.
Andrew Rossell.
Minister for his very helpful reply, but as he knows full well, violence, illegal drug dealing and escapes are on the rise in prisons, with a shocking 12% increase in breakouts across England and Wales since 2024, risking safety of all of our communities, with dangerous criminals also being released in error. So, when will the Justice Secretary take responsibility for this utter shambles, get a grip on the situation to ensure that dangerous criminals remain locked up behind bars and do the job he's supposed to be doing to keep the British people safe?
Mr. Speaker, I'm constantly aghast at the chutzpah of the party opposite, who left the prison system in utter crisis after 14 years. Prison officers' numbers reduced under the party opposite, prison places hardly rose at all. We are stabilising the prison system, investing in security measures to ensure that we have a prison system that is fit for the future and safe for the public.
Peter Bedford.
Mr. Speaker.
Justice Secretary.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer question 8 and 23 together. Everyone has a right to a fair trial, and the essence of a fair trial is a timely trial. Only 3% of all criminal cases are heard by a judge and jury under the current regime. Jury trials will remain a cornerstone of the British justice system. Delayed justice is justice denied.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Justice Secretary may have complete faith in the independence of the judiciary. Sadly, I do not. We have seen a plethora of cases, particularly involving freedom of speech, where the judiciary has arguably been influenced by political correctness and virtue signalling of bodies like the Sentencing Council. If his proposals are designed to reduce the backlog, why do they not include a sunset clause?
Sarah State.
Well, can I say I completely reject
Yes.
what the honourable gentleman has said. It is an absolute essential foundation of our democracy that all of us in this House and in government respect the independence of the judiciary. And I would remind the honourable gentleman that it is precisely because of the independence that the judiciary are not able to answer for himself. The Lord Chancellor has that responsibility, and I will do it robustly.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Lord Chancellor made his statement on jury trials last week, he said an impact assessment would be published with the legislation. Given how powerful a defender of jury trials he has been in the past, will he publish the evidence and the modelling that he has seen since coming to office, which caused him to change his mind?
So state.
Well, can I say, Honourable Gentleman, he's absolutely right. Whenever a government proposes legislation, there must be an impact assessment, both an economic impact assessment and an equality impact assessment. And of course, we will publish it in the usual way.
Jessica Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Victims must be at the forefront of our minds when thinking about reforms to our justice system, many of whom wait years, often re-traumatised, going through the process of a criminal court trial. So can the Secretary of State tell me how these changes will ensure that we bring criminals properly and promptly to justice that brings matters close for victims?
So state.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right. A third of all sex victims in the backlog have now been waiting a year or more, and she knows that in many of those cases there are also defendants playing the system, pleading late, pre-hearing after pre-hearing, and witnesses then fall away, of course, and cases collapse. And it's for that reason that it's absolutely right that we change the threshold, introduce the measures that Brian Levison has properly looked at in order to speed up the process and get those victims justice.
Carl Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Justice Secretary wants to do away with some jury trials. He wants to extend the powers in the magistrates to sentence to up to 24 months without the right to appeal conviction or sentence. The capacity in prisons, I think I'm right, is at 88,000 as we speak today. Where are all these apparent guilty people going to be put?
So state.
Well, can I just... the honourable gentleman and I have been friends for a very long time, and I recognise his experience in matters related to criminal trials. Can I just remind him that, of course, we've got the sentencing bill passing through the House that, of course, will give us greater capacity in the prison system, and he will also know that the government is on track to provide 14,000 extra prison places by the early 2030s, or only 500 asked the last government. All of that increases capacity, and of course, we hope that jury trials will also make a difference for victims.
Sir David.
The Justice Secretary quite rightly says that justice delayed is justice denied, but summary justice is no justice at all. And he based much of his argument on the views of the eminent Lord Levison. But has he read the analysis of that review by Kenneth Rivlin, KC, who went through in great detail, in expert detail, the analysis and described much of it as unfounded and misguided because it's based on poor data. If he hasn't read it, will he please read it before he comes back to the House?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that it was a serious independent panel, and I don't think you can sort of reject Sir Brian Levison out of hand in that way. And I'd remind him that David Allmeron was also on the panel, and of course the analysis was based on data, based on evidence internationally, and that's why it's important that we implement it, because there is no silver bullet. To effect change, we have to do it all. Otherwise, at the next general election, the backlog will have soared to over 100,000.
Sarah Coombs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard heartbreaking stories from my constituency of women who've waited years for their abuser to be brought to trial. This crisis that has developed in our courts is having a devastating impact on victims. Given that many of the previous reforms to judge, jury and magistrate trials over the last 50 years were also intended to speed up the system, can the Secretary of State outline how these proposed changes will fix the broken system and deliver swift justice for victims?
Sarah State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable lady. First, we need investment, more sitting days. We didn't get that under the last government. We're getting that now. Second, we need reform. We asked Sir Brian Leveson to look at this in great detail. He did that. We must now respond and not shirk from the reform that's necessary. And third, we need modernisation. That's why, for example, being able to get a transcript, being able to get a recording at magistrates is so important.
Robert Jenrick, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the Justice Secretary's plans to slash jury trials, he's giving magistrates more serious cases. However, he also plans to scrap the automatic right to appeal, a vital safety valve in courtrooms where justice is being delivered at pace by volunteers. Last year, 5,000 cases were appealed from magistrates' courts, of which more than 40% were upheld. Given that very high rate of successful appeals, will the Secretary of State be honest with the public and concede that curtailing appeals will unquestionably lead to miscarriages of justice?
Well, I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, the senior honourable gentleman on his backbenches has just said summary justice is no justice. Either you believe in our magistrates or you don't. I believe in our magistrates. But what Sir Brian recommended was a permission stage. And we accept his recommendation of creating a permission stage on appeal. That is the right thing to do, particularly because there are many appeals that have no merits, and that's why victims fall away.
Robert Jenrick.
If the Secretary of State maintains that this won't lead to miscarriages of justice, then he must be expecting the same number of cases to be appealed, in which case there's no point doing this in the first place. The truth is, deep down, the government is willing to tolerate some miscarriages of justice to save a paltry sum of money. And all the while, the solution is staring us in the face. Since the Justice Secretary announced his plan on the 2nd of December, 640 sitting days have been missed. Mr. Speaker, it's the end of term. The Justice Secretary's report card is marked improvement required. Will he reflect over Christmas and make scrapping his plan to slash jury trials a New Year's resolution we can all support?
State.
I know that the honourable gentleman has more front than Blackpool Pier, but let's be clear, it is a permission stage that we are accepting that was recommended by Brian Leveson. What we need are more sitting days, more investment, and we're doing that. We cannot shirk reform, and he knows that jury trials will continue to be a cornerstone of the Crown Court system, and we need modernisation. All of that not done by the last government.
Sir John Whittingham.
Number 9, sir.
Minister.
Strategic lawsuits against public participation, otherwise known as SLAPs, are an abuse of the legal process and pose a threat to democracy. The government recognises the profound financial and psychological impact of SLAPs. That's why we commenced the SLAPs provisions in the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023 related to economic crime SLAPs, and we're monitoring how that is operating.
Sir John.
While I welcome the Minister's answer, is she aware that in the space of 1 week, the Solicitors Regulation Authority has lost 2 tribunal cases relating to SLAPs? So does the government consider that the SRA is fit to purpose in this area? And is it not the case that further legislation to prevent lawyers from pursuing abusive cases is needed?
Minister.
Well, I really welcome his question, and we are considering actively where we can go further to extend the definition of SLAPs to those that range beyond economic crime. Obviously, the Solicitors Regulation Authority is independent of government, and I welcome their guidance, reminding solicitors of their duties and of the consequence of breaches, and I hope that they uphold that guidance robustly.
Tim Rock.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Last week, I announced record funding for victim support services. That's $550 million over the next 3 years, the biggest investment in victim support services to date. This Labour government is putting victims at the heart of the justice system.
Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the increased funding. Victim support and commissioning of those services is incredibly important, and the operational independence of police and crime commissioners
has been invaluable in that regard. So can I ask what assurances ministers can provide that with the abolition of PCCs, victim support won't be led by forces themselves and that we keep the important progress that we've made over recent years?
So State.
Well, very grateful to my honourable friend, and we have committed to provide PCCs with £1.3.8 million for the year 26-27 and £134 million for 27-28. This total is made up, of course, for their work on sexual violence and domestic abuse. Really important that we ring-fence that funding.
Sir Gavin Williams.
Mr. Speaker, building on the honourable gentleman's question, police and crime commissioners were able to act as a strong, independent voice for commissioners. And in none of what's been outlined so far, there's really a voice for victims in local areas. What will the Secretary of State do to try and make sure that that is remedied?
So State.
Well, we've got up to May 2028. It's important that we get the money in and that money particularly goes to the front line. And I think it is the case when I certainly meet with organisations on the ground, let's say an organisation like Rape Crisis, they are the voice of women on the front line. But of course we're looking very closely at how this interacts after we no longer have PCCs.
Lisa Smart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 11, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government takes seriously concerns about the operation of this Hague Convention in situations where domestic abuse is present. Internationally, the UK continues to work with other parties of the Convention to ensure that it operates effectively, particularly in cases involving domestic abuse. We have been an active member of the Steering Committee for 2 international forums to discuss and share best practice on this issue, and we have contributed financially as well to support these events.
Lisa Spark.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. 2 of my Hazel Grove constituents, who I won't name because they're going through active cases, have fled separately Australia and Poland with their children due to domestic abuse and coercive control from their partners. Many mothers, like them in similar circumstances, face the prospect of being compelled to return to the country they fled in order to accompany their children under the Hague Convention in the way the Minister describes. I had a very constructive meeting with the Minister back in June, since when the 2nd Forum on Domestic Violence and the 1980 Child Abduction Convention has taken place in Brazil. Could the Minister update the House on what progress specifically was made at that forum and whether the Government plans to bring forward proposals, legislative or otherwise, to strengthen legal protections for mothers and children fleeing abuse under the Hague Convention?
Well, I welcome the Honourable Lady's question and her continued engagement on this really important issue. The Government is now considering initiating further qualitative research on the operation of the 1980 Hague Convention in cases relating to domestic abuse, and I can confirm that this research will inform any future policy and ensure that reforms are grounded in robust evidence, improving outcomes for both children and survivors, and I will endeavour to keep her updated and involved in the development of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Question number 12, sorry. 12.
I don't have number 1. Number 12. We have extended the period of time that certain prisoners on standard determinate sentences are eligible for moves into open conditions. We know that open conditions can lead to better outcomes for offenders and confront reoffending. This is because open prisons give offenders better opportunities to find work and re-establish relationships with friends and family, both of which are significantly proven to reduce the chances of reoffending.
Andrew Stowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with what the Minister just said. But through the early release programme and also looking at the models the government wants around a third to split the sentencing in custody, prisons such as Kirkham in Lancashire, in my constituency, are increasingly seeing their open prison population having a much higher turnover of prisoners increasingly who have been serving shorter sentences and are there for much shorter periods of time. They're effectively becoming Cat C prisons, but without the walls, the security and the resources. And we're concerned that the knock-on effect that is going to have on the ability to run those rehabilitation programmes, which are designed to have prisoners there for significant amounts of time at the end of their sentences. So what additional resources is the government going to put in to support the rehabilitation programmes in open prisons?
I'm grateful to the honourable member. He raises an important point. As the sentencing bill hopefully receives royal assent next year, there are certainly operational challenges to ensure that those reforms and changes to sentencing in our prison system work smoothly. One of the major measures in the sentencing bill, which, by the way, the party opposite opposes, is to reduce short-term sentences for the very reason that the honourable member has set out. I'm very happy to have a discussion about the prison in his constituency and to ensure that the department is working with them very closely to make sure that they are ready for the changes that will hopefully come into effect next year.
Michelle Welsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 13.
Mr. Speaker, we are enhancing security measures and easing crowding to curb violence and improve safety in prisons, as well as looking at measures to improve meaningful activity to increase welfare. We're investing around £15 million in protective equipment to help keep frontline staff working in prisons safe, including expanding the use of tasers and providing more protective body armour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Loudon Grange Prison in my constituency is a failing prison. I am inundated with correspondence from prisoners, families and staff who on a regular basis inform me about unsafe conditions and a toxic culture of bullying, incidents of violence, drugs, self-harm, many of which are not recorded, and no access to healthcare professionals. Since the last inspection in 2023, 10 prisoners have died. The prison has also had 32 days of lockdown in the past 2 years. The prison also has the worst possible rating for safety. Does the Minister agree with me that it's time the government made a direct intervention in this prison?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friends raising this important case, and it's very much on the radar of the Ministry of Justice. I will be personally raising it with the Prisons Minister, Lord Timpson, in the other place, and I'm very personally committed. I will come to Loudon Grange in the new year, hopefully with her, and we can meet with the Governor and others to discuss these critical issues.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that there are a number of prisoners at the present time who are undertaking a hunger strike. They are remand prisoners and some of them don't have a trial date until 2027. There are deep concerns expressed by them, their families and their legal representatives about access to medical treatment and the way they've been treated when taken to hospital as well. To help the situation, would the Minister be able to meet their legal representatives and families if necessary in order to discuss this situation and try and move forward to help the safety of these particular prisoners?
Minister.
No. Luckily, the Ministry of Justice and the Prison Service has a robust and proper guidance and procedures for when these scenarios come to fruition. I am satisfied, and the Ministry is satisfied, that those procedures are being enacted and will continue to keep it under review.
Matt Turner.
Question number 14, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Our magistrates are the backbone of local justice, and I want to thank every magistrate, the length and breadth of the country, who give of their time to deliver that justice. And in return, we need to support them. That is why we provide extensive training, not just at the start of their magistrate's journey, but we provide mentorship on a continuing basis. But I recognise that we want to go further in terms of providing stronger recognition for their service and also looking in the new year to overhauling the expenses regime so that we can support magistrates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. I recently had the opportunity to visit the County and Family Court in Watford, and whilst there I was talking to them about the challenges around staff and finding sufficient staff. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that staffing is what makes magistrates and family courts work? And can she outline a little further, please, what support the government is offering to them? Thank you.
I agree with his point. I was glad to visit the newly reopened Barnet Court in my constituency, reopened after a year. And what I noticed is what I think many who cross the threshold into our courts, which is that first welcome that you get from court staff, often allaying nerves and anxiety in an alienating environment, is absolutely critical. That's why we want to support our court staff. It's why we're investing in legal advisors who support our magistrates, and it's why we're supporting all of them too. And I'd be happy to come and visit his local court in Watford if the opportunity arises.
Will Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear from the Minister how the government is supporting magistrates and how she recently visited a recently reopened magistrates' court. The biggest single issue the government could do in my constituency of Woking and my county of Surrey is reopen Woking Magistrates' Court that was closed by the former Conservative government. Will the government consider reopening Woking Magistrates' Court?
Well, we keep our court's estate and the assessment of need under constant review. I'd be very happy for him to write to me so we can look into the provision in his area.
What was good for the Minister might be good for Chorley as well, with the reopening of a court. Debbie Abrams.
Question 15, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 15 and 20 together. The government, as you will know, inherited a justice system in crisis. Whether a family experiencing family breakdown, small business owners trying to resolve contractual disputes, or victims of crime, we inherited a system in crisis in every jurisdiction, and we're beginning to turn that oil tanker around. We are sitting at maximum or close to maximum in every single jurisdiction, whilst investing up to £450 million in our courts every year.
Debbie Abrams.
I'm grateful to the Minister for her answer, and she will recall last week I asked and mentioned about 2 cases that I have involving juveniles and child sexual abuse. The cases of alleged sexual abuse have been adjourned a number of times, and as I explained to her, the damage that this is doing to them and their lives cannot be underestimated. So I appreciate in terms of the reforms that are underway, but what urgent steps can be taken now to make sure that these children have the justice that they deserve and can continue their lives?
Minister.
I am grateful to her raising this absolutely shocking case, which I'm aware of, and I'll be writing to her on the particulars of it. It graphically demonstrates precisely why we need reform of our criminal courts. As the Deputy Prime Minister just explained, that will take 3 things. Investment, which we're currently seeing in both sitting days and criminal legal aid. It will take systemic reform, and it will take modernisation. And that third component, how we can improve efficiencies in the here and now through better adoption of technology, through improving the smoother running of our courts, will help the victims in the case that she outlines.
Render Just.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Justice delayed is justice denied is, of course, a harsh reality for the nearly 80,000 cases that are currently waiting to be heard in the Crown Court, and I'm pleased that the government is taking action to modernise our justice system and to be reassured that the sanctity of jury trials will be preserved. But considering that only 3% of criminal cases are currently tried by a jury, what assessment has the Minister made on the impact that removing jury trials from certain either-way offences will have on significantly reducing the present unacceptable court backlogs?
Minister.
Well, he raises a number of incredibly important points. Those 80,000 cases in the backlog, behind each and every one of those cases, there's a victim. There's someone who's accused who may be trying to clear their name. And as those backlogs head in the wrong direction with agonising delays for all participants, we will not sit idly by. And it's why we've adopted the recommendations of the independent review of criminal courts, which makes a very important observation, which is that currently 90% of cases in this country are dealt with without a jury, robustly, properly and in a timely fashion in our magistrates' court. And it's why all of the package, not a pick and mix, the package of reforms that we are bringing forward is designed to deliver swifter justice for victims.
Dr. Neil Shastri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the contributing factors to the court backlog is the state of disrepair of our court infrastructure. So can the Minister set out how many of the more than 500 Crown Court rooms are currently unusable because of their state of repair?
Minister.
He is absolutely right. The crumbling and decaying state of our court estate, if you like, has become a metaphor for the justice system that we inherited from the previous government. It's why we've increased the court's estates budget. It's why we're opening new courts in Blackpool. It's why we're putting shovels in the ground in inner London. It's why we've increased that court's estates budget by £28 million so that we can improve maintenance to keep as many courtrooms running as possible. But in the end, as Sir Brian Leveson tells us, money alone will not be enough. We need reform so that we can run the system at capacity and deliver swifter justice for victims.
Vicky Slade.
Mr. Speaker, when this government came in July 2024, magistrates were dealing with cases up to 6 months. Now it's 12 months, and by next year it could be 2 years. And there's already a backlog of 361,000 cases in the Magistrates' Court. In my meeting with the Law Society today, they expressed deep concerns that magistrates would be able to take on longer, more emotionally draining cases, and that actually some magistrates may decide that they weren't comfortable with depriving people of their liberty for that long. What assessment has been done of the ability of magistrates to cope emotionally, but also the Magistrates' Courts to cope with those increases?
Minister.
Well, I think she's referring to the sentencing powers and the proposal to increase sentencing powers rather than the wait time. The fact is that our Magistrates' Court is an efficient jurisdiction dealing with 1.3 million cases a year. The fact that the Magistrates' Association and the Magistrates' Leadership Executive have endorsed the government plans speaks to the vote of confidence that we are placing in our magistrates to deal with the caseload, the volume of cases and the nature swiftly and robustly and fairly. But of course, she's right that our magistrates deserve the support for dealing with emotionally charged matters, and it's that support and that training that we will be ensuring is provided.
Sir John Hayes.
Question 16, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, following the changes in the sentencing bill, there will be more criminals behind bars than ever before, and those convicted of the most serious crimes will be unaffected, and they will remain in prison for as long as they do now.
Sir John.
The salient difference between the government and the people is the public expects vile, vicious, violent people to be locked up so they can ruin no more lives, whereas the government wants to let them free, including eligibility applying to about 2/3 of rapists and 83% of child sex offenders. Is it any wonder, Mr. Speaker, that the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and the Victims Commissioner have criticised these plans? So will the government at least exclude those kind of offenders before they implement this policy? For otherwise, they will wreak harm, hurt and hate to every part of our country.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I had the great pleasure of hearing the Right Honourable Member's contributions in report stage and committee stage on the sentencing bill. I remind him, as I reminded him then, that we inherited a prison system on the brink of collapse. And the worst way to fail victims is if we have the worst offenders and there are no prison places for them to be kept behind bars. We will not allow that to happen. I remind him again that the sentencing bill is informed by the Independent Sentencing Review, led by a former Conservative Lord Chancellor, who offered sensible reforms to ensure that our prison system can cope with the demands, is fit for the future. And I remind him finally, this is not soft on crime, Mr. Speaker. By the end of this Parliament, there will be more criminals behind bars than ever before under this Labour government.
Shadow Minister Dr Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week the government pledged action on violence against women and girls, an issue that I know many members across this House care deeply about, including many members opposite. But at the same time, this so-called earned progression model will see thousands of rapists, child groomers and paedophiles let out of prison earlier. And shockingly, Mr. Speaker, this last week a government minister said that the reason for this, that they couldn't be excluded, was because it would increase the risk of inaccuracies in release calculations. Does the minister think that a single victim of a rape should expect the offender to be let out of prison earlier because the government can't calculate the release date properly?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we won't take any lessons about violence against women and girls from the party opposite. Prosecutions for rape went down under the last Conservative government. We are taking action to protect women and girls. And I will repeat the point, Mr. Speaker. For victims of the worst offences, the scenario that we faced last summer, that when those offenders were convicted, there was not space in prison to keep them behind bars. That is wholly unacceptable, and this government will never let that happen again.
Kieran Mullen.
Mr. Speaker, the House will have heard that they are refusing to exclude those types of offenders. And I'm pleased to say there are actually a number of members on the benches opposite that share my discomfort with the measures that the government is taking. And in fact, the member for Amber Valley, the Labour member for Amber Valley, tabled previously an amendment to exclude existing offenders from the measures. Why does the Minister think she did that?
Minister.
I speak regularly with my honourable friend, the member for Amber Valley, who was an experienced CPS prosecutor. And when I speak to her, she tells me that the worst scenario for prosecutors who are trying to keep our streets safe is when the prisons are full and offenders cannot be kept behind bars. That was the situation that the last party left in this country. We're fixing their mess.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Justice Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to Lenny Scott, who was a dedicated prison officer and much-loved family man. In 2020, he seized an illicit mobile phone from a prisoner who took revenge 4 years later by taking his life in broad daylight. Perpetrators of heinous killings like these must feel the full force of the law. I can announce today that we will broaden the starting point for whole life orders to include murders connected to the current or former duties of a police, prison or probation officer. This means offenders can expect to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. It is the latest step this government is taking to keep our hard-working prison and probation staff safe.
Member Cumberland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for that clarification. Mr. Speaker, by the time my constituent gets her day in court, she would have waited nearly a decade for justice. This is the cost of the Tories' broken court system. Unacceptable waits contributing to tragically high number of victims who don't proceed to trial, resulting in near total impunity for the men who commit serious cases of sexual assault and domestic abuse. I know my right honourable friend is working tirelessly to reduce the court's backlog. What is he doing to ensure that victims are put first so that they don't have to face waiting a decade for justice?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm truly grateful to my honourable friend for once again raising the voice of victims in this House. And I hope over the coming months, as we debate our courts bill, that honourable members will keep in mind those victims and the voices that we often hear from female members of Parliament. The 550 million that I found for victims, multi-year funding to give them certainty was essential. We will continue to keep victims front in mind.
Chair Justice Secretary Robert General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I commend the Justice Secretary for the government's decision to extend whole life orders to prison officers. 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting the parents of Lenny Scott when they came to Parliament. And it is absolutely right that we extend this to brave prison officers who are killed both in the course of their duties and in the exceptional circumstances that faced Lenny Scott after they had left the service. So he can be assured of the support of those of us on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Justice Secretary appeared on Sky News and revealed that 12 more prisoners had been mistakenly released and 2 remained on the run. So I have 2 very simple questions. Since then, how many prisoners have been mistakenly released? And how many more remain on the run?
Minister.
The Deputy Prime Minister set out a 5-point plan to deal with the long-standing issue that we've had in our criminal justice system of release in errors. There were 800 release in errors under the party opposite when they were in government, and never once did they come to this House and give an update to the House. We're going to be releasing much more of that data over the coming months.
Robert General.
Mr. Speaker, in all the years I've been in the House, I've never known a Secretary of State fail to answer the first question from his opposite number. But that says a lot about the man. Look, the Justice Secretary was fine answering questions 2 weeks ago on the media when the police investigation was underway. But now he says, or his minister does in his stay, that it will be inappropriate to comment in the House of Commons. What utter nonsense. Does he seriously think anyone is buying that excuse? He either doesn't know the details or he's covering up his failure, both of which, frankly, are a dereliction of duty. And, Mr. Speaker, how on earth does he think the public can assist the manhunts that are presumably underway across our country and clear up his mess if he won't publish the names or the mugshot of the prisoners mistakenly released? Once again, he's endangering the British public.
Minister. Utter nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We don't take advice on the operational challenges which we face when we do come across these issues from the party opposite. We will engage with the police directly. We will not be giving a running commentary on this issue, because this has been a long-standing issue of a criminal justice system that is failing after 14 years of the party opposite in government. We have set out a 5-point plan in which we are attempting to grapple with this problem, and Dame Owens will be reporting back to the government early next year, and we look forward to hearing her recommendations.
Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to raise the issue of my constituent from Pinkston. They were awarded a substantial amount of money at an employment tribunal over 2 years ago for unpaid wages. They haven't been able to track down the company since then. They're using a shell address. They're not responding to any correspondence. The constituent has paid a private company to try and find the company, and they have got nowhere. There's been 2 years of hardship and mental health issues. Will the Secretary of State outline what steps are being taken to make sure that hard-working people get the money that is owed to them?
Workers must receive the awards that they're entitled to, and the case that she raises demonstrates the need that this government will take up to strengthen enforcement by transferring responsibilities to the new Fair Work Agency, working with HMRC and the Insolvency Service to drive compliance and crack down on non-payments, which will help constituents like hers.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Andrew Turner has been fighting on behalf of parents of disabled children across the country who can't access their children's trust funds when their child turns 18, even though that money could support with the additional cost of living when you are a profoundly disabled young adult. Andrew has seen 10 Justice Ministers come and go since he started his campaign. Can the Minister assure me today that the current Minister will be the last one Andrew has to meet before the situation is remedied?
Minister.
I thank her for her question. I met with Andrew Turner. He is a tireless campaigner, and we were embarking on the work that I think is necessary to support families like his and those that he represents. I have personally undertaken to ensure that that work continues, irrespective of which personnel is sitting in the chair, and I will follow up not just with Andrew, but I know his very dedicated MP, and I forget the constituency, but I will follow up with Andrew and those who represent him.
John Morris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. At the beginning of December, a sapling from the Sycamore Gap tree was planted by Michaela Trussler and her family to commemorate what would have been her daughter's 18th birthday. Since Holly Newton's tragic murder, Michaela has campaigned tirelessly to reduce the age limit at which someone can legally be classified as a domestic abuse victim. Would the Secretary of State join me in recognising Michaela's tireless campaigning and meet with Michaela and myself in the new year to discuss age classification for victims of domestic abuse?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this, and I will of course be delighted to meet with him and Michaela, and I thank her for her tireless campaigning on this issue. I share the concerns about abuse in teenage relationships. I am pleased to say that we are conducting a scoping review of the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, including the age limit of victims, to ensure that adolescent relationships are captured. The upcoming Violence Against Women and Girls strategy will also set out steps to tackle teenage relationship abuse, and I look forward to meeting with him and Michaela.
Greg Rister.
Mr Speaker, the Justice Secretary's plan to slash jury trials without any guarantee the backlog of cases will fall has not survived first contact with the Labour backbenches. The backlash has forced Number 10 to reassure Labour members that legislation won't be introduced until October of next year. But the Justice Secretary's team insist it will be coming in February. They can't both be right. So can the Justice Secretary now confirm at the dispatch box when the legislation is coming forward?
The Honourable Gentleman can do better than that. It's not true. We're serious about bringing down the backlog. And so that means that, of course, we want to introduce our courts bill in the early part of next year.
Nancy Woods.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following a string of shocking cases in which the bodies of the deceased were not treated with the care and respect they deserved by funeral directors, can the Minister update the House on cross-departmental work being done to regulate the funeral industry?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that very important question, and it was an honour to meet with him and victims and the bereaved families who have been affected by this horrific situation. Our thoughts remain with those grieving families, Mr Speaker, who rightly expect their babies and the deceased to be treated with dignity and respect. That is the minimum that they deserve. We are committed to taking action here, and the honourable member might be aware that the Department for Health and Social Care has today published their interim review into the fuller inquiry. I look forward to reading that and working with him and others to ensure that those recommendations are followed.
Miller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent is a female probation officer in the early stages of her career. She came to my surgery last week because she is scared for her own safety at work. 3 weeks ago, her colleague in the Oxford Probation Office, who was following the guidelines put in place following the similar attack in Preston in July, was stabbed multiple times by somebody on probation. So will the Minister meet with me and my constituent to discuss extending the Assaults on Emergency Workers Offences Act which already covers prison and custody officers to probation officers.
So stay.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. He would have seen the announcement that I've just made in terms of whole life orders, and of course I will ensure that the Prisons Minister meets with him. We will do everything we can to keep our probation officers safe.
Josh Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With some victims of sexual assault being told that their trials might not be heard until 2029, what can we do to reduce delays and tackle the backlogs so that victims can be confident they will get justice and they don't have to face the associated trauma with these delays?
So 550 million for victims was essential. Getting the courts bill and implementing Sir Brian Levison's review is essential, and modernisation and all the work and money that we're putting into our court system.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whatever changes the Minister is seeking to make to juries, this will not make one bit of difference in my North Norfolk constituency if people can't get the legal advice that they need. Can the Secretary of State assure me that recent funding announcement will be targeted at legal aid deserts like North Norfolk? And at the third time of asking, will the Minister please meet with me and legal aid professionals to discuss their challenges?
Secretary of State.
Yes, we will ensure that that money reaches his constituency, and I'll ensure that the Minister meets with him.
Mr. Speaker, Home Office changes to skilled worker visa thresholds will impact large numbers of prison officers who have migrated from countries such as Nigeria. The Prison Officers Association has made it clear that the prison system could collapse if this policy is applied. Please could ministers update the House on what conversations are ongoing with the Home Office and if there will be any exceptions?
So stay.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and she's absolutely right to put on record the huge support that we've had, particularly from West Africans in our prison systems, for which I'm very grateful. I am in discussion with the Home Secretary. I hope to update the House shortly on that. I do see a way through.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just build on the excellent question by the Secretary of State? How many prisoners have been mistakenly released, and how many will it take before the Justice Secretary considers his position?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've already made it very clear during this Justice Oral Questions that we're not going to be giving a running commentary on the numbers. This government is taking action to deal with this problem in our criminal justice system, which, by the way, the party opposite, over 14 years, did not do anything.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Rochdale, our police work closely with staff from the Sexual Assault Referral Centre in St Mary's in Manchester, and they help rape victims through every step of the legal process. But for many rape victims, the most traumatic thing is facing their rapist in court. So will the government explain and how they're going to help stop victims being smeared by defence lawyers as money grabbers, and also how we can take into account in court the evidence of previous domestic abuse?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. That is why we are determined to ensuring that rape victims are treated with compassion and dignity throughout the entire criminal justice process. We are committed to implementing the Law Commission's review on bad character evidence, tackling those rape myths and stereotypes, and we are committed to our manifesto commitment of introducing independent legal advisers for adult rape victims to ensure that they get the support that they desperately need.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers have responded to me on two previous occasions very helpfully regarding the 68 is too late campaign. Last January and most recently in writing in September, on both occasions indicating that the government were prepared to amend or at least review pension provisions. Indeed, a working group was established to examine similar terms currently in place within the MOD. Can the Minister provide an update on the working group's proposals and the government's intentions?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, very grateful for the honourable member's question. The government regularly meet with trade unions, the Prison Officers Association. I take this opportunity to put on record again our thanks to prison officers who do an extraordinarily difficult job in very difficult circumstances, and we'll be updating the House on that issue in due course.
Lola McAvoy.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, a man was convicted by a jury of sexual assault of a child under the age of 13. This vile perpetrator was given a suspended sentence with his mental health cited as the reason for the suspension. He was spared prison, and crucially, his mental health had no impact on his culpability for this horrible crime. My constituents have sought justice, and I agree with them that this is outrageously lenient. Will the Secretary of State please write to the Sentencing Council to stress that this government believe that those found guilty of sexual crimes against children should go to prison, and that suspended sentences must only be granted in the rarest, most extreme mitigating circumstances?
So state.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady and for her campaigning on this issue. I know that she knows that I can't comment on the individual case which was subject to a review, but I do know that the Minister is meeting with the Chair of the Sentencing Council and will take forward her recommendations.
Mr. Speaker, both this government and the previous government tried to get to grips with the increasing problem of smuggling of illegal drugs into prisons. Can the Secretary of State indicate that this government, this time, will get to grips with this problem so that people can be reassured that it is not a continuing and escalating issue?
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and that's why the 40 million we're investing in drone technology particularly is important, but also new X-ray machines across our prisons to drive down drug use.
Michelle Scroppen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Forests with Impact are delivering innovative prisoner rehabilitation through horticulture, paid work and accredited training at HMP Havering, helping people gain skills for employment on release while contributing to environmental recovery. Would the Minister be willing to visit to see this work firsthand and meet with me to discuss how similar schemes could be supported more widely?
I thank my honourable friend for that important question. Absolutely, it sounds like a really important initiative. A big swathe of this government's agenda is trying to tackle reoffending, which means improving rehabilitative services within our prisons. I look forward to meeting this one with her in the new year.
We're Mr.
Speaker, 1 in 3 rape trials end up being postponed, in some cases more than 6 times. During the process, 73% of rape survivors say police treatment worsened their mental health. What improvements will be made of how the police treat survivors of rape?
Well, can I assure the Honourable Lady that the Criminal Justice Board met recently, and that brings all the justice partners together, and of course the police are represented on that board. But I would urge her to look closely at the Courts Bill coming forward, because the reform that we need to reduce the backlog is within it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the news that the Deputy Prime Minister has been appointed to lead on a national summit on the issues affecting men and boys in this country. But with politics, and let's face it, progressive politics including that, all too often failing to see and speak to some of the specific challenges faced by men and young boys growing up in Britain today, how can we make the most of this summit to be a truly catalysing moment to start to put this right?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for championing this issue. As part of our mission on violence against women and girls, we must build a positive agenda that promotes opportunities for men and boys, but in no way is at the expense of opportunities for women and girls. The Prime Minister has announced a new programme of work which will be led by myself and Minister Davies-Jones, and that will include a national summit for men and boys next year.
Alison Bennett.
Speaker, Survivors Network support all victims of sexual assault and abuse right across Sussex, and that's why me and my honourable friend the member for Chichester met them at the start of the month. They told us that due to rising costs of mixed inflation, £40,000 of their costs are now unfunded. Given the government's emphasis on driving down sexual violence, is this the right decision?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady may have missed the announcement of £550 million going in to support victims and support services, the biggest amount ever. I have met with victim support services across England and Wales who have been welcoming this announcement. This money will be transformational, it will change lives, but victim support on its own isn't enough, and that is why we need to take every step possible to reform our criminal justice system, which this government is doing.
Ewan Steinbank.
Mr. Speaker, the House will all deliver a generational strengthening of legal aid, but does the Minister share my constituents' concerns that the Scottish Government have yet to confirm whether similar non-means tested legal aid will be available for bereaved families in Scotland?
Minister.
No, I thank my honourable friend's question here. I can confirm that we have had positive conversations with the Scottish Government about extending the provision to Scotland. This is a matter for them. We are engaging in positive conversations, and they have shown willing in wanting to adopt the same model that we will be adopting to provide legal aid, non-means tested legal aid, for all bereaved families who have had state involvement in the death of their loved one.
Has the Secretary of State's Department had any contact with the Minister of Justice in Northern Ireland over the looming crisis in criminal justice arising from the fact that on the 5th of January the criminal barristers are going on strike because there has not been an uplift in legal aid rates since 2005? And if contact is made, will the Minister of Justice in Northern Ireland be asked why, given her statutory duty to review the rates, she paused the last review in 2022 and why, when she announced an interim uplift last year, it has never been paid?
Minister.
The honourable member will know this is a devolved matter. I met with the Justice Ministers from all the devolved nations last week, and we continue to have that dialogue to ensure that justice is served across all 4 countries.
Andy Slaughter, Chair of the...
Thank you much, Mr Speaker. Is the Minister aware there's a crisis in family mediation with no confirmation of mediation vouchers going beyond next April, and over half of legal aid providers forced to give up in the last 8 years? Does the Minister agree that this is short-sighted, as mediation saves time, money and families? And will the Government work with the Family Mediation Council to rescue the sector?
Well, mediation is hugely successful, and so I'd want to reassure the honourable gentleman that we will continue to talk to the sector about this issue, and I'll update him in the coming weeks.
Final question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I sat on the Public Office Accountability Bill Committee, better known as the Hillsborough Law. I was very, very grateful to the Minister for agreeing to meet with the MP for Cheadle and me to discuss 11 amendments, 2 new clauses and other general points that came up in the line-by-line scrutiny. The Minister was very clear that she's a woman on a mission and she wanted this bill on the statute book as soon as possible. But can I seek her assurance she will meet with my colleague and me before the bill reaches report stage? Thank you, sir.
Minister.
Yes, I am confident. I am a woman on the mission. The Honourable Lady is right. I will be meeting with her early in the new year, ahead of report stage, to discuss her amendments and the bill's progression through the House.
Right, that completes questions. Let the front bench change over. Right, we now come to the urgent question. Dame Priti Patel.
Mr Speaker, and for granting this urgent question, because every single day we discover that Labour's betrayal of the British Chagossian community continues. To ask the Secretary of State for the FCDO if she'll make a statement on the rights of British Chagossians to access the trust fund and resettle the Chagos archipelago.
Minister.
On the 22nd of May, the Diego Garcia Treaty was signed and laid before the House. As the Defence Secretary told this House on the day of signature, the treaty secures the strategically important UK-US military base on the island of Diego Garcia. The Diego Garcia military base is essential to the security of the UK and our key allies, and essential to keeping British people safe. Under the terms of the treaty, the UK will capitalise a £40 million trust fund for the benefit of Chagossians, which will be established by Mauritius. On the 12th of December, the Mauritian government approved introduction of primary legislation to establish the trust fund. The Mauritian bill confirms the principle that the trust fund will be operated for Chagossians by Chagossians. Decisions on the use of funds will be taken by a trust fund management board. The board will comprise 12 members, 7 of whom will be Chagossians, ensuring a majority representation. The chair of the trust fund will be a Chagossian, selected by the Chagossian members, and following extensive representations and engagement by this government, the Mauritian bill also now confirms that a UK-based Chagossian representative will sit on the board, alongside representatives living in Mauritius and the Seychelles. The UK High Commissioner to Mauritius will also attend board meetings. We welcome these commitments by Mauritius, which will ensure the trust fund reflects the full spectrum of perspectives within the Chagossian community. The treaty enables Mauritius to develop a programme of resettlement on islands other than Diego Garcia. This agreement is the only viable path to resettlement on the archipelago. The UK government has been in talks with Mauritius to ensure that this programme is open to all Chagossians, irrespective of their country of residence. The Mauritian government confirmed on 12th of December that eligibility to resettle will apply to Chagossians born on the archipelago before the 31st of December 1973 and children of parents either of whom were born on the archipelago before that date. As of April 2025, 94% of Chagossians with British nationality also had Mauritian citizenship. However, any UK-based Chagossian who does not hold Mauritian citizenship and meets these criteria will be eligible for it and therefore able to participate in any future programme of resettlement. All Chagossians will remain eligible for British citizenship under the current citizenship pathway. Chagossians will be able to hold both British and Mauritian citizenship. Mauritius has also confirmed that civil status documents issued by the government of Mauritius will continue to record the place of birth as the Chagos Archipelago for all those born there. Where for any reason this has not been the case, the government of Mauritius will review and amend the documents as necessary. This landmark agreement, Mr. Speaker, secures the future of the strategically critical UK-US military base. As the Defence Secretary told this House, there was no alternative but to act. In so doing, we have protected Britons at home and overseas.
Thank you
for granting this urgent question. And I think we've just heard from the Minister, basically, that the government's betrayal of the British Chagossian community continues. We've just had more details now on how bad this deal is for the Chagossian community. Labour's surrender of British sovereign territory means that now future decisions on access and resettlement to most of the archipelago, the ancestral home of Chagossians, are now left in the hands, guess what, of a foreign government. So can the Minister confirm if British Chagossians will need to become Mauritian citizens to have any hope of being entitled or eligible for future resettlement and the resettlement programme? That's a simple yes or no, because it sounds like it is an absolute yes. This is a country that until only weeks ago had an offence on its statute books for, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, for misrepresenting the sovereignty of Mauritius, and a country from which hundreds of Chagossians have fled to Britain in recent weeks. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, this is now adding to pressure on local authorities to house this community across the country. So does the Minister recognise the sheer madness of this plan? And, Mr. Speaker, the government has also confirmed that despite Britain giving Mauritius, the government of Mauritius, £40 million of British taxpayers' money for the trust fund, Britain has no proper representation on its board and no control over how these funds are spent. There will just be one UK-based Chagossian representative on the board, chosen not by the British Chagossian community, but guess what? By the Prime Minister of Mauritius. Can the Minister tell us if he thinks this is acceptable? And did the government, I can't say the Minister specifically, press for greater Chagossian and British representation on the board? And can he tell us exactly what UK delegations have been doing in Mauritius this year, who they've met and what has been discussed? And on the so-called contact group, why has the government refused to seek the views of the British Chagossian community in this surrender treaty, choosing instead, Mr. Speaker, to outsource this vital function to a House of Lords Select Committee whose survey has been open to manipulation and interference from this for the Mauritian government? We've seen that online. So it's no wonder, Mr. Speaker, that the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has called the government out for its betrayal of the Chagossian community. It's massively embarrassing, particularly when we've got a government of human rights lawyers. What is the Minister's response to this UN committee? Will he suspend the ratification of this appalling treaty, which is what the UN calls for, and importantly say sorry to hard-pressed taxpayers in this country who are forking out £35 billion for this shameful atrocity?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of Christmas, I will not respond to allegations of betrayal. I suspect that the benches opposite will want to chunter throughout the discussion. Perhaps they might remind themselves who started these negotiations and on what basis. They no doubt will wish throughout this session to focus on transfer of sovereignty. Perhaps they might remind themselves what their negotiating position was in government. But let me turn, Mr. Speaker, to the questions that are asked. I'm pleased to inform the House that we have met with the Chagossian contact group both on the 2nd and the 8th of December. My ministerial colleague who leads on these issues has been very keen to ensure that he hears from the full range of views from Chagossians in the UK. Now, I understand, as I know the colleagues opposite also know, that there is a range of views amongst the Chagossian community. They do not speak with one voice. This government is trying to make sure that we listen to all of those views. The Shadow Foreign Secretary asks about the ratification of the treaty. As she knows, it will be going for third reading in the House of Lords in the new year. No doubt this will be discussed further then, as it was discussed in this House. This treaty will be scrutinised properly in the normal way, and all of these points will be surfaced.
Danny Beale.
Thank you, Mr. Welcome the Minister's clarification that the Chagosian community will be involved in the operation of the trust fund. Turning to support here in the UK for the Chagosian community, a significant issue. The previous government, who now sit opposite, pretending that they have no idea where some of these issues have come from, legislated in 2022 to expand the rights of Chagosian to settle here in the UK and claim citizenship up to 2027. And in Hillingdon, which is a port authority, an authority that I represent, we are seeing significant movement of people based on those historic rights that were given by the party opposite without adequate planning. Will the Minister and his team meet with me to discuss support available in the UK, its adequacy, and how we can stop playing politics with this complex and historic issue and start to continue to find solutions?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I'll ensure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Hotel Pinkerton, Liberal Democrats spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Democrats have been clear from the start. Nothing should be happening to the Chagosian people without the full democratic input of Chagosians themselves, who, in the custom of other overseas territory citizens, we should recognise as a self-governing and self-determining people, even if the UK has deprived Chagosians of access to their homeland for more than 50 years. Those principles, if they are to mean anything, Mr. Speaker, to our overseas territories family, must be both immutable and universal. Now, in recognising that, I note that I'm now joined by the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which last week reported that the proposed agreement on the future of the Chagos Islands should not be ratified on the grounds that it risks perpetrating long-standing violations of the rights of Chagosian people. I'm also concerned about the requirement, made, I think, explicit in the Minister's statement yesterday, that Chagosian people will only be able to partake in the resettlement programme if and only if they accept Mauritian citizenship, even in the circumstances where individuals and families have no historical connection, cultural or civic, to that state. So can the Minister therefore set out whether any negotiations have taken place that would have enabled Chagosians to exercise their right of return without being required to ascribe or subscribe to Mauritian citizenship? Were there any discussions of a Hong Kong-style arrangement whereby permanent residency of freedom of movement may have been granted outside of citizenship? And finally, how does the Minister reconcile last week's UN report with his stated desire to conform with our international obligations?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in relation to the UN report, I'm sure this will be discussed at third reading when the House of Lords further considers the treaty, and indeed again in this House, if that is where it returns. On the question of the trust fund, the written ministerial statement yesterday set out the position set out by the Mauritian government. There will be further discussions between the UK and Mauritius in the new year.
Father of the House, Edward Lee.
The Chagosians are and have been treated by successive governments appallingly. We all accept that. And to me, it's unconscionable that for the first time since the First World War, a colonial people is being transferred from one colonial power to another, 1,000 miles away, with no control. And I think there should be a referendum. But we are where we are. So does the Minister recognise that it would sort of lighten the whole atmosphere if there was an absolute right of return of all Chagosians, not having to take Mauritian citizenship and being fully in control of their own trust fund? In other words, they have a right to self-determination like any other people on earth.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my neighbour for the question. The negotiations with the Mauritian government by the UK have had the wishes of the Chagosian people very much at their heart. Some of the elements that I laid out in my response to the Shadow Foreign Secretary are responses very much to the Chagosians themselves, including both the majority control of the board that will determine the nature of the trust fund, and indeed the element about civil status documents and origin of birth. We will continue to talk to the Chagosian community about their wishes.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Is, in the government's opinion, Mauritius a free society, and what is the government's assessment of the nature of its relationship with communist China?
Minister.
These issues have been discussed at some length. Mauritius is obviously an important partner for us, and I will leave it to the relevant minister to provide a more full commentary about the state of their relations with China.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is striking that the government, despite deriding 14 years of Conservative government, wants to follow the example of the previous government on just this matter. But can I just point out that the Foreign Secretary, the noble Lord Cameron, decided that these negotiations were not in the national interest, were not in the interests of the Jogosian people, and that they should be suspended. Can I recommend he follows our example on that?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm confused with the opposite benches whether I am or am not to follow their example. My understanding of their example was that Boris Johnson offered large quantities of money to Mauritius, absent negotiations, to try and make this all go away. That did not work. Negotiations were then opened with sovereignty at their heart. I'm not sure which elements he would say I should or should not demur from. We are taking the action required to ensure the safety of the base, the security of the British people, and we're doing so closely with our partners, including the United States and Mauritius.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks warmly of the relationship with the Jagosians. Well, they have, of course, just formed a government in exile. So, does the British government recognise the Jagosian government in exile?
Minister.
As colleagues across the House will know, there is a range of views through the Jagosian community. I am not familiar with the government in exile in any great detail, but I suspect that there are a whole range of views amongst Jagosians, both here in the UK, in Mauritius and elsewhere, and the relevant minister has been closely engaged with a wide range of Jagosian voices.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I accept the fact that the treaty and the UN report will be discussed further in the other place, but the Minister is here to answer our questions, and we're the only ones that are able to question the issue. So given the United Nations reports, what is the government reaction to those reports, and are they going to honour the recommendations?
The honourable gentleman will now have been asked an urgent question about the trust fund, and that is what I have come prepared to talk about. I'm sure the relevant minister, in the plenty of opportunities that he has had before and that no doubt this House will give him, will answer further questions about the UN report. We have undertaken this process soberly and seriously. We recognise that the gentleman on the opposite benches who started this process had views. We are now trying to follow that through, and of course, we will accord with international law throughout.
After a string of high-profile corruption cases across Mauritius, what confidence does the Minister have that the bounty he's about to bestow on the Mauritian government, including on the Jagosian Trust Fund, will be spent appropriately and won't land up in the pockets of corrupt officials and politicians?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I set out in my response to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, the Trust Fund will have a majority of Jagosians on it and a chair appointed by the Jagosians. The conduct of the Trust Fund will also be observed by our own High Commissioner.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, after a 3-month wait for an answer, the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry informed me in a written answer that the Government Actuaries Department's figure for the cost of the Chagos deal of £34.7 billion is inaccurate. I struggle to believe that the Government Actuaries Department would have published the figure in error in August. It was widely reported at the time, and as such, they've never publicly corrected the figure. So, could the Minister confirm that the Government Actuaries Department figure of £34.7 billion over the length of the deal is correct, and that the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry is misinformed?
Minister.
I will have to consult with the Ministry of Defence to be sure where the error is. My understanding is that all costs have been verified by the Government Secretary Department. I can't provide any further clarification on the cost today.
Jim Ellis.
In getting to this point, the government has made much of its adherence to international standards and bodies. Yet in the last 15 minutes, the Minister has been asked 3 times to respond to the United Nations findings that calls for the suspension of the treaty, that criticises the denial of the right to self-determination and the right to return. Why is the Minister now so timid when it comes to dealing with those international findings?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the honourable gentleman accepts all of the UN findings, for example, in relation to Gaza or in relation to UNRWA. There are a wide range of different UN bodies with different responsibilities. The UN Secretary General himself welcomed the agreement between the UK and Mauritius. This further UN body with the further report will no doubt be studied carefully by the relevant minister, but I don't have a fuller response to give him today.
Oh, Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's an honourable and just man, but I do have to ask this question. Does the Minister accept the reasons why Jacosians are concerned about delivery of the UK-funded trust fund? They are concerned that this fund will not help to resettle Jacosians, but be used by other settlers. How can government ensure that this is not the case with only one seat at the table, so to speak? Thanks so much.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have a deep feeling of foreboding when the honourable gentleman chuckles before he asks me a question. That's an indication that the question will be difficult. I think the answer is straightforward. In addition to the British Chagosian who will sit on the board, our own High Commissioner will be an observer of that board in order to give greater insight and transparency to the UK about its operations.
Right, that completes the urgent question. We'll now move on to the next urgent question. Adam Jogi.
To ask the Foreign Secretary if she'll make a statement on the government's new approach to Africa.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Africa matters to the United Kingdom, and it matters to this government, our missions and our plan for change. Africa has the greatest growth potential of any continent, providing expanding opportunities for UK businesses to kickstart economic growth. Strengthening the foundations of UK growth requires engagement with Africa to secure our borders and address the drivers of illegal migration. Africa is home to 30% of the world's mineral resources, including significant deposits of the growth minerals identified in the new UK Critical Minerals Strategy. These are essential to securing our supply chains and enabling the UK's mission to become a clean energy superpower. However, we inherited an approach that reflected the past and not the opportunities of Africa's future. That's why we committed in our manifesto to deliver a new approach for mutual long-term benefit. We were also clear that reframing our relationship was not something to cook up here in London and then package as a shared approach. So we launched a 5-month listening exercise, hearing from governments and over 600 organisations, from civil society and diaspora communities, from businesses and universities, about what they valued and wanted to see from Britain. There was a clear common message. African nations want respectful, long-term partnerships that deliver real change for people's lives. Responding to the consultation, the UK's new approach provides a high-level framing to guide the government's long-term engagement with African partners, reaffirming the shift from paternalism to a partnership of respect and equality. It does so over 7 areas of shared interest. First, we are moving from donor to investor. We will go further to unlock investment and trade, helping African and British businesses create quality jobs, economic opportunities and prosperity. Second, we're working together on the challenges of illegal migration. Migration should be fair, managed and controlled. We will be unapologetic in pressing for high ambition and clear progress against our priorities in this area. Third, we are advancing shared interests on climate, nature and clean energy, recognising their significance for growth and security. Fourth, we're continuing to collaborate for peace and security, working to silence the guns and tackle violence against women and girls. Fifth, we're strengthening the systems that support people in growth, including strengthening financial self-resilience. Sixth, we're championing African voices in global decision-making, including in the global financial system. And finally, we're supporting innovation and cultural partnerships. This adds up to a new kind of partnership, one that works with African leadership, one that is inclusive and respectful and strong enough to work through difficulties and disagreements. Our High Commissions and embassies will be at the forefront of embedding this approach in spirit and content, and we will take it forward into the UK's G20 presidency in 2027. British ministers will be out there on the continent championing these principles, strengthening coherence across our partnerships and backing diverse African voices to shape our work.
Can I just gently say to the Minister, this is a very important statement. and absolutely what he said is so important to the House. We don't need WMS. It will be easier if it was brought to the House rather than hidden away in the library. Adam Jockey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to you for granting this urgent question. And I declare an interest as Chair of the All-Party Group on Foreign Relations and Co-Chair on the APG on the Commonwealth. The geopolitical challenges we face as a nation are acute and mounting, and they have real impacts on people back home in Newcastle and Lyme and across our United Kingdom. For too long, our relationship with countries on the African continent has been viewed through the prism of colonial guilt. It's harmed our ability to engage, it's seen relationships left to suffer, and it's let generations down. We must think about what we can do with nations on the African continent, not to them. The African continent is a big and diverse place and cannot be put in one basket. Each region will have different characteristics, and our approach needs to reflect that with respect, understanding and action. The United Kingdom has been found seriously wanting in relation to its former colonies over the last 30 years under successive governments. This must be a turning point based on respect, on friendship, on equality, and our shared histories, bonds, systems and experiences. I'd like to ask the Minister the following. How will the approach protect the United Kingdom against the geopolitical threats we face from Russia, China and other hostile states and their corrosive impact on nations across the African continent? Many African nations are members of the Commonwealth, a hugely important post-war creation, but totally underutilised. So how will the approach ensure that the Commonwealth gets meaningful support and is properly fit for purpose? And I am concerned that one word that wasn't mentioned in the statement was the word Commonwealth. How much money will be put behind this new approach? What steps will be taken to ensure that new meaningful trade deals are established between African nations and the United Kingdom? Because fair, balanced and decent trade has a hugely important role to play in this relationship and must be taken seriously. What will be expected of our heads of missions at high commissions and embassies across Africa to advance this approach? And what will our new approach mean for British engagement with the African Union? The bonds, Mr. Speaker, of history and people bind our United Kingdom and many independent nations on the African continent together. Common languages, common legal systems, common but difficult histories and a common purpose. This new approach has the potential to help grow our economy here at home, to neutralise the influence of hostile states and to move forward together. And if it does that, it will have my full support.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend both for the question and his dedication and diligence to these issues. I want to really assure him about the importance that this government places in the Commonwealth. It is a vital partnership both in Africa and across the world. It is the C in FCDO, and it is very close to our minds and central to our strategy, both in relation to Africa and elsewhere. He asks important points about the role of Russia and China in Africa. As he knows well, particularly China has been a long-standing presence in many African countries, an important source of trade and finance. But in my experience, African countries are not naive about Chinese motivations or the potential risks associated with elements of their offer. The Africa strategy that we have announced yesterday is in part a response to that desire from so many African countries for a longer, enduring and sustainable partnership with the UK, both to respond to the interests of others, whether it's China or Russia, but also to build on those historic ties to which he so eloquently referred. I want to pause briefly, Mr. Speaker, to talk about Russia's role in Africa. They are exploiting conflicts, instability and natural resources right across Africa, in the Sahel and indeed in North Africa. We are already supporting African partners through strategic security and defence relationships with countries such as Kenya, Nigeria and Ghana, coordinating closely with like-minded states and international organisations. The role of Africa Corps in Africa is malign.
Shadow Secretary of State, Dame Priti Patel.
I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman from Newcastle under Lyme for securing this important UQ. And if I may say to the Minister, I don't think it's acceptable just to sort of regurgitate the written ministerial statement from yesterday. There are some fundamental issues about what should be the government strategy. Yeah. First and foremost, it was wrong to simply say that the approach that the government inherited was wrong. I should know that, having recapitalised CDC, and the fact that BII now have a huge amount of annual investment and reinvestment every single year on the economic development in Africa. But fundamentally, whether it's from Gavi, the Global Fund or the Sustainable Development Goals, these are founding principles that are now being advanced across Africa, and the government really should do much more to stand up and defend them. But, Mr. Speaker, with reference to the written ministerial statement yesterday, there was no reference to China, Belt and Road, debt traps, or Russia's nefarious activities, or the Wagner Group in Africa. And yet, before our eyes, we see the axis of authoritarian states pillaging African countries for its natural resources. Where is the substance or a plan of action of influence to counter this growing influence of that axis? There is also scant regard for the government, in the government's plan, for the Commonwealth, as we've already heard, and its role in upholding democracy, capacity building and freedoms. Why is that the case? And is the government working with the new Secretary General on her economic vision, which would clearly benefit the UK and Africa? We don't know how the government intends to support the African Union or rise to the challenges in the continent. And sadly, we're seeing so much conflict right now. So can the Minister explain what is the UK going to do to leverage our expertise to conflict resolution, to good effort? And finally, on illegal migration, Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Minister and the Government, which intentionally tore up the engagement with a key Commonwealth partner called Rwanda, that was a country that's thought to give leadership on illegal migration, to stop young men from leaving the continent at great risk because they wanted to create an economic development partnership with the UK. That surely speaks to some of the serious challenges that this Government now needs to pick up and confront.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I addressed the questions of Russia and China somewhat in my answer to my honourable friend, but let me reassure the Shadow Foreign Secretary how central those issues of conflict are to us. I travelled to Libya in recent months, where, of course, as she knows, Russia has been active, particularly in the West. The Wagner Group may have been renamed as the Africa Corps, but they remain as malign a threat to Africa and indeed British interests as they ever were. And we are active across the continent in seeking to counter their baleful influence. She talks about some of the migration pressures from Africa. We are working in places like Algeria and Tunisia and indeed Libya, where small boats do cross into Mediterranean Europe. Well, I'm glad to hear from her a moment of uncharacteristic harmony between the two benches, where the work that was started by the previous government was functioning, we have continued it. Where it was obviously not, such as the Rwanda deal that she refers to, we stopped it.
Marsha Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the government's publication of the Africa approach? Strengthening systems that support people and growth will be the right approach to improve health, education and social protection. So can the Minister confirm that this approach will include disability rights and inclusion, as the written ministerial statement didn't mention that? So in order to truly strengthen systems and support, disability must be at the heart of that.
Minister.
My honourable friend is a powerful advocate. I know that the Minister for Africa has been considering these issues, and I'll ensure that she gets a meeting to discuss them further.
Dr Alpington, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government are absolutely right to say that the United Kingdom needs a new relationship with Africa, and many in this House had hoped that that partnership would be sustainable, strategic and built on mutual trust. Africa, after all, has one of the youngest populations in the world. It's got incredible economic potential. And yet, this government is cutting aid to Africa by 12% this year alone, with further reductions likely in years to come. Now, the Liberal Democrats criticised over the last decade the constant churn in government ministers from the Conservative Party. And we were very disappointed that the Africa Minister has recently again been changed, and that has come as hard news in continental Africa, where the Minister was appreciated and the hard work that had been undertaken was bearing fruit. So warm words are not enough when the overall trajectory that we see from the UK is of arguably diminishing partnership and diminishing influence. Cutting overseas development aid from 0.7 to 0.3%, for example, the lowest this country has ever seen, and a time when debt costs are rising in continental Africa. And it's important to invest in the work of the FCDO, because trade commissioners, for example, provide the in-country expertise that is needed to develop those new economic relations that the Minister talks about. On migration, upstream investment in poverty reduction and conflict prevention is more important than ever, as is support for organisations like the British Council. So Africa is an essential strategic partner in an increasingly contested world. So can I ask the Minister directly, how can the government seriously claim it's strengthening partnerships and seeking to influence Africa while cutting aid and hollowing out the very tools that make engagement sustainable?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at the centre of the new strategy, as I set out in my response, is a move from simply donation to investment. That new partnership is what we hear is demanded from across Africa. But let me join with the honourable gentleman in paying tribute to the previous Minister for Africa, who I worked closely with. He was a diligent servant of the FCDO and of the country, and I know he continues to do important work in the other place. The new Minister for Africa is excellent. I have been the Minister for North Africa consistently through the period, so I'd reassure him that while some things have changed, others have not. The points he makes about ODA, we will set out the ODA allocations in due course in the new year. And on his points about whether or not we truly can have influence in Africa, given the decisions we've made on ODA, I think he has clearly heard from the continent itself the valuable work that the Minister for Africa, both past and present, is able to do, and that is the work that will continue.
Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the change of approach that the Minister has outlined, that change from paternalism to partnership and the listening way in which this has been done. I am concerned that poverty reduction was not mentioned in the statement, nor sustainable development goals, or working with local organisations on the ground who know best. Could the Minister reassure the House that poverty reduction is at the heart of our strategy of working with organisations, local organisations, across the many countries in Africa to achieve the real change that Africa needs?
Minister.
I can reassure my honourable friend who's got long experience in these matters that we remain committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, committed to poverty development and committed to working with local partners.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I say, Mr. Speaker, I absolve entirely this Minister from responsibility for this statement today, as he is not the Africa Minister, but is not the so-called new approach for Africa rather like the old strategy, so well set out in the White Paper published by the former Prime Minister in November 2023, with its emphasis on investment, but now with much less development investment and much less influence? Will the Minister confirm that bilateral programmes are being cut to ribbons across Africa? Does he realise that in major African institutions there is genuine amazement and astonishment that a Labour government, Mr. Speaker, for the first time ever in the Labour Party's history, has slashed development aid? And does he appreciate that as Britain and America are withdrawing from Africa, it is Russia and China that are taking our place?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me pay tribute to the work of the Right Honourable Gentleman. I served for 2 years in South Sudan when he was the Development Secretary. I know his commitment to these issues. I know how many of the programmes that still run in Africa were set up during his tenure. As I said, we will set out the ODA allocations in more detail in the new year. Obviously, it is vital that we make this shift. As the Right Honourable Gentleman alludes to, there's been recognition on both sides of the House that there is a need for a change in approach. That is what the Africa strategy is about, and we will no doubt set out further detail in the new year.
Colvin Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have visited 4 of my 6 markets in southern Africa this year, and this approach is what we are clearly hearing from those nations. It is an approach which transforms our relationship from donor to investor and from benefactor to partner. And what will be key in delivering this ambition will be a focus on economic diplomacy, and therefore what is critical is a sustainment of our resources and our networks within the region. Can I ask the Secretary of State how this will be reflected in a new appreciation of the vital work that our diplomatic network does within Africa and the expertise that they have, because it's vital to advancing both our and African interests?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend both for his kind words about the diplomatic service, but also for his own diligent efforts as a trade envoy to Southern Africa, I know that it is yielding real results. He is right that there is a real desire for serious engagement on economic issues. We see in his work and the work of many other trade envoys the potential for further growth in Africa, and the Foreign Office will remain focused on it.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Since it's nearly Christmas and in the spirit of goodwill, can I congratulate the Government on changing and updating the UK language on the Western Sahara? And can I ask him what the Government will now do to ensure the good progress we have made since the 2019 association agreement with Morocco is sustained and it improves both our bilateral trade further and also our mutual security?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of Christmas, I thank my predecessor for the important and helpful question. Mr. Speaker, I know the House will be aware both of the shift in position in relation to the Western Sahara announced by the previous Foreign Secretary and for our vote in the recent Security Council deliberations over the future negotiations over Western Sahara. The UN Special Envoy, Mr. de Mistura, retains our full confidence. He is working hard to try and advance talks. It is vital to try and bring this long-running conflict, this long-running impediment to greater unity in North Africa to a close, and we hope to see progress in the coming months.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I don't disagree with any of the principles set out in the strategy, I am, though, very disappointed by its level of ambition and detail. It does not reflect what we did when we were last in government with the Africa Commission, which was an all-encompassing report to really look at the way we work together at university level, skills, trade, women and girls, all of these issues, and build democracy. It also, unfortunately, does not address the real risk of Russia and China's role in Africa. We have 21 Commonwealth countries in Africa. They are telling us that they desperately need us as a partner in Africa so that we can bring the stability and prosperity we all want to see to the continent.
My honourable friend has much experience in these matters. I sought to address some of the questions on Russia and China earlier in the session, but the Minister for Africa will have heard her disappointment. I'm sure we'll be happy to discuss it further.
Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will know, Mr. Speaker, I've been calling in this place for the government to publish an Africa strategy for a very long time. Has it been worth the wait? No. Yesterday, a written ministerial statement, a new approach, a partnership, not a strategy. As been said already, 21 Commonwealth nations out of the 54. Many years ago, I visited the Foreign Office, met the Africa Minister. He said, Mark, I want you to tell me about Africa, certain countries. I said, well, the first thing you need to do, Minister, is change the map sat behind you. He looked round, tiny little map, and the continent is huge, as the Minister knows. This is a timid approach to Africa. It's rather embarrassing, quite frankly, and the Minister and the government should be doing better.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I now accept that it's a timid approach. We have set out 7 principles of a new approach following hundreds of consultations launched by the previous Foreign Secretary, but I've heard what he said, as will the Africa Minister.
Bales.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the government's new approach to Africa and the shift from discussion of the continent and our role as from donors to investors and partners. The last 50 years we've seen the importance of Asia, of the tiger economies, of India, of China driving the global economy, and it's quite clear that the next 50 years will be an African future with demographic growth, with economic growth and the role of critical minerals and other resources in Africa. And so I welcome this approach's recognition of that importance. In light of the continent's growing importance, will we see a shift in FCDO resources and diplomatic resources to ensure that our resources to discuss and build those relationships align with this new strategy and the continent's importance?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as you'd expect, our resources will indeed reflect our strategy, but as I said earlier in the session, ODO allocations will be announced in the new year, as of course will questions about the laydown of the Foreign Office.
Mr. Speaker, warm words offered cold comfort to those facing brutal aid cuts this winter.
While the Scottish Government remains fully committed to its global partners, the UK is in full retreat. And while Scotland's First Minister personally visits Malawi in recent weeks to see first-hand the impact of life-saving partnership we have, the UK Government leaks to the press that it's likely to cut all of its aid to Malawi, Mr Speaker, one of the poorest countries in the world. So in the spirit of Christmas, will the Minister stand here today and do the right thing, halt all of those aid cuts until they've carried out full impact assessments country by country in the African continent?
Minister.
In the spirit of Christmas, Mr Speaker, I'm very glad to hear that the First Minister of Scotland has been travelling to visit UK aid programmes, as of course have I and the whole of the Foreign Office ministerial team. As I said earlier, the decisions for ODA allocations will be announced in the new year.
Bob. Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of the issues here is what the effect will be of this new policy. So can I just take one example? What is going to be the position in Nigeria, where so many girls are not in education, where we've invested as UK in education to encourage them to do so, but many of them come under threat from Islamists who try to convert them. So what will the impact of this new policy on, for example, what we do in Nigeria?
Mr Speaker, as I said, we'll set out further details on allocations in the new year, but I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising the situation in Nigeria. Clearly, to understate the position considerably, women and girls in Nigeria face very, very considerable threats, as do Christians in Nigeria, as recent events have demonstrated. Let me take this opportunity to condemn the recent abductions. We welcome the news that some have been released, and we join in the government of Nigeria in calling for the release of all remaining abductees and for perpetrators to be brought to justice. Events in Nigeria have taken a very, very dark turn in recent months, and it is a high priority for the British government to see that reversed.
So Julian Lewis.
Well, following directly on from that, what can the Minister tell us about any military advice or assistance which our experts in counterinsurgency are giving to the governments of friendly Commonwealth countries like Nigeria that face vicious jihadist extremist attack from organisations like Boko Haram?
Minister.
This is an important question from the honourable gentleman. We do have a security and defence partnership with Nigeria. We are helping to build capacity within Nigeria's security agencies to respond to and prevent future attacks, including through support to the multi-agency kidnap fusion cell, which is obviously particularly critical given the events to which I just alluded.
Shocker Adam.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As Shakira once famously said, this is time for Africa. And although I welcome the Minister's statement, I am also a little bit underwhelmed, but especially by the constant cuts by successive governments to the foreign aid budget. And we know, Minister, that 800 million Africans are living in countries where public spending on debt interest exceed that on health expenditure. This is a feedback loop that which only makes life harder. What Africa needs is long-term investments and be viewed as a partner. So can I ask the Minister, what step is the government taking to invest in partnerships with African countries, and how will they stack that up with what China has been doing for close to 3 decades?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman asks an important question obscured by Shakira lyrics. He makes an important point. It is absolutely indisputable that China has put more financial resources into Africa in recent years than in any period before. What we hear, however, from many African governments and African people is that they are wary of some of the conditionality that comes with that investment and the debt to which the honourable gentleman refers to. We are seeking a partnership which is respectful, a partnership which can help African governments address these issues, and where private sector investment is available from the UK, that is what we're working to support, including through the trade envoys, such as by my honourable friend who spoke earlier.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his answers and recognise the intent of the Minister and Government to try and help in whatever way they can. For centuries, churches and faith groups have sent missionaries to Africa. I think of just one charity, the Samaritan's Purse charity, who works across Africa and the Middle East. I also think of many churches from ours in Strangford, for example, the Elim Church and the Elim Missions, who go to Swaziland and Eswatini, and they've built schools, they've built clinics, they've built hospitals, they've brought farm implements, they've introduced farming practices, modern farming to feed the people. I have in the past highlighted the key role that church missions could play. Minister, is it not about time to work with churches and make those partnerships work for Africa and its people? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question. In my own time overseas and indeed in Africa, I saw the absolutely vital work that church groups do. It was the bishops in South Sudan who performed some of the most important peace mediation work. I met just last night with Christian groups operating in the Holy Land as well. We are conscious of the vital work done by faith communities in Africa and across the world, and the freedom of religious belief and partnership with groups of all denominations is very important to this government.
Right, we'll let the front benches change over. Statement, Secretary of State Steve Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for granting the statement. Mr. Speaker, when we each enter this chamber, we carry on one shoulder the duty to represent our constituents, and on the other, the responsibility to protect this democracy. The case of the former MEP Nathan Gill has revealed the threat our democracy faces today. And I know it has caused deep concern right across the House. On Friday, the 21st of November 2025, Mr. Gill was sentenced to 10.5 years in prison for accepting bribes linked to the Russian state and attempting to advance that state's twisted interests. This is the longest sentence handed down to a politician in a case like this in our nation's recent history. While we must commend the work of the police and the Crown Prosecution Service in successfully prosecuting this case, it is right that we now take a step back to look at how we can protect our democracy against such appalling crimes. And Mr. Speaker, let me be clear about what this crime was. An elected politician took bribes to parrot the lies of a hostile state responsible for the death of Dawn Sturgis, a British citizen on British soil. He took the side of those responsible for invading a sovereign European state. And he was prosecuted while Putin's military targeted the civilian men, women and children of Ukraine. At the time, he sat as a member of the European Parliament, supposedly representing the British people, and went on to become a senior leader of a UK political party. Mr. Speaker, we must learn the lessons so this can never happen again. Following discussions with ministerial colleagues, I have today ordered an independent review into foreign financial interference in UK politics. This will be led by the former Permanent Secretary Philip Rycroft, reporting both to me as Secretary of State responsible for elections and to the Minister of State for Security as the chair of the Defending Democracy Task Force. The facts are clear. A British politician took bribes to further the interests of the Russian regime, a regime which forcefully deported vulnerable Ukrainian children and killed a British citizen on British soil using a deadly nerve agent. This conduct is a stain on our democracy. The independent review will work to remove that stain. The purpose of the review is to provide an in-depth assessment of the current financial rules and safeguards and make recommendations. I will deposit a full copy of the terms of reference in the House of Commons library. I have asked Philip Rycroft to report back by the end of March, when I will return to this House to set out his findings and the government's response. It is right that the review is independent of government and independent of any political party. It's also important I make clear to the House that investigating crimes and examining broader allegations of wrongdoing remains the responsibility of the Electoral Commission and the police, not this review. Individual members should continue to refer to the current National Protective Security Authority guidance and speak to the parliamentary security authorities if they have any specific concerns. The findings of the independent review will build on both the government's election strategy and counter political interference and espionage action plan, and inform the Elections and Democracy Bill that we will bring forward next year. We published our strategy for modern and secure elections earlier this year. This will close loopholes that should have been closed long before we entered office. It will strengthen existing rules on donations, which mean only legitimate donors can support legitimate campaigns. And it will clamp down on the free rein shell companies and unincorporated associations currently have to make donations without first undergoing proper checks. However, Mr. Speaker, in the time since that strategy was published, events have shown that we need to consider whether our firewall is enough. The independent review will look at this, focusing in particular on the effectiveness of our broader political finance laws, on current checks and balances within political regulation for identifying and mitigating foreign interference, on safeguards against illicit funding streams, including cryptocurrencies, and on the rules governing the constitution and regulation of parties and the Electoral Commission's enforcement power. It is right that the review looks at these critical issues in depth, and I stand ready to do whatever is necessary to protect British democracy from foreign and hostile interference. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier the weight of responsibility we should each feel in this House. Those who seek to disrupt or attack the foundations of our democracy will never prevail. Britain will always be a democracy because the people of this country will never have it any other way, and because the choices of the British people will always be the guiding star for our nation. I want to thank all honourable members who have come to the Chamber today. I am highlighting the threat of foreign interference because the first responsibility of His Majesty's government is to keep our people safe. Our ability to protect this nation and its values is always stronger when this Parliament presents a united front. So I hope members right across the Chamber will offer their support for the independent review. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Paul Holmes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly thank the Secretary of State in advance for advance sight of his statement. And let me begin by saying that protecting the integrity of our democratic system from foreign interference is not a partisan issue. It goes to the heart of public trust in our elections. Interference in our elections from foreign actors is something that we must all be vigilant against, and I concur fully with what the Secretary of State has said about Nathan Gill, and join him in his sincere thanks to the CPS and the police. Any crime such as this deserves full condemnation from all members of this House. Mr. Speaker, the government announced its election strategy back in July, a strategy which affects all of us in this House. However, there was no consultation of political parties before the strategy was released. There's also been no formal consultation since it was announced. December marks the first time that the government has engaged with the Parliamentary Parties panel. We do, however, welcome the announced independent review led by Philip Rycroft and wish him well in his work going forward. Will the Minister commit to all parties being consulted on the new independent review during its work? And does the Minister accept the long-standing convention
that governments should not unilaterally impose changes to the law affecting political parties as parties without proper consultation and cross-party engagement. On electoral resilience, last week the Speaker's Committee on the Electoral Commission noted that the Commission was not consulted at all on the cancellation of the 2026 mayoral elections. So will he update us on whether council elections are going ahead or not, or will he cancel more at the last minute, and will he give electoral officials plenty of notice, whatever he chooses to do? Now, delving into the government statement. The government has signalled its intention to introduce Know Your Customer-style checks on political donations, yet political parties are not banks or the taxman. During the passage of the National Security Bill, the last government committed to look at greater information sharing powers between relevant agencies and with political parties, precisely to identify irregular sources. Does the Secretary of State agree that such information sharing would help political parties meet these new duties? I welcome the Secretary of State's announcement on cryptocurrencies and the clarity that this will bring in scope of the independent review. The Secretary of State is absolutely right to mention Russia. The last government legislated for a foreign influence registration scheme to stop covert foreign influence. Can the Minister explain why the government has repeatedly refused to extend this scheme to China? What reasons are there for leaving such a gap in our national security framework? And will China be included within the scope of the independent review? Unfortunately, this decision sits uneasy alongside the government ramming through the planning application for the Chinese embassy. How is this meant to convince members of this House that the government is taking foreign interference seriously from all malign powers across the globe? Madam Deputy Speaker, there are clear loopholes that this government needs to address. Currently, there are loopholes created by the Scottish and Welsh governments that allow Chinese residents in Scotland and Wales to make donations to UK political parties and politicians. Can I ask what steps the government are taking to close these loopholes and ensure that safeguarding is consistent throughout the whole of the United Kingdom? Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, protecting our democracy requires transparent cross-party discussion. Centralised power that bends its knees to the Chinese does not have the United Kingdom's national interests as a priority. The Secretary of State has an opportunity now to set the record straight and reassure the House of this government's commitment to take foreign interference from every malign influencer seriously. I do hope the concerns I've outlined are directly addressed here today.
Secretary of State.
Well, first of all, can I warmly welcome his support for this review? I agree with him. This is way above party politics. This matters to all of us. It's about the integrity and the safety of our democracy and about making sure that the safeguards we have in place to protect those precious things are sufficiently robust. Regarding the election strategy and the bill that will be brought forward in the new year, then we will of course be engaging with parties over aspects of that bill before it is brought forward to the House. He asked about the elections that are scheduled to go ahead. They will be going ahead. He asks about cryptocurrency. That will be in scope for the review, and I expect the independent reviewer to take a view on that matter. It's been raised on all sides of the House previously, but I'm sure he and other members of his party will want to make their views clear to the reviewer as he comes to his conclusions. Again, the review is fully independent, but I would expect China to be fully in scope because of the questions that have been raised about the threats that China poses to national security, well documented. And regarding the devolved administrations, we will be engaging with them over the applications of the findings of the independent review to competencies that are within their scope relating to elections.
Chair of the Select Committee, Florence Eshelamy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for making his statement today. I think for far too often, for members right across this House, sometimes we do take elections for granted. The fact that we can go to the ballot box and cast our votes in a free and fair election is something that we have to fight and we have to make sure we protect. Yeah. So I do welcome the fact that we are looking into this investigation, particularly the angle of strengthening foreign donations. It cannot be right that political parties can raise millions of pounds in cryptocurrency and that will go unchecked in terms of looking at where the source of that funding. So I welcome that review into the illicit funding, making sure we can trace the source of that funding coming into our political donations. I also welcome the appointment of Philip Rycroft, and I hope to go through the terms of reference which the Secretary of State outlined will be published later. In terms of welcoming this announcement, it's important that we do look at the fact that democracy is under attack, and we need to make sure that accountability and independence stays in check. The strategy and policy statement introduced by the previous Conservative government was a step in the wrong direction, giving politicians undue influence over the Electoral Commission. Can I ask the Secretary of State if he will confirm that the strategy and policy statement will be abolished in the upcoming elections bill, and if the independence of the electoral commissions will be protected in future?
Secretary of State.
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for her support for the review, and I look forward to the Select Committee making their views clear to Philip Rycroft and his team. I agree with her concerns over the problematic nature of cryptocurrency and the anonymity of the donors. It's important that there is transparency for where that money comes from, so we see who may be seeking to influence British politics and British democracy, particularly if they are malign, hostile, foreign or state actors. She asked a question about the elections bill. That will be published in the new year, and the details will be very clear to her then.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Zoe Franklin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I thank the Secretary of State for advance notice of the content of his statement. The Liberal Democrats welcome the statement and the decision to establish an independent review. This is a serious issue that clearly demands action, and we'll be following the review very closely. Public trust in politics is at a dangerously low level. Polling consistently shows only 9 to 12% of the public trust politicians, and this is something that every member of this House should be seriously worried about. Restoring trust must begin with integrity and transparency. People need confidence that the information shaping our political debate is accurate. Trust also relies on fairness. Every vote must count equally, and that requires a fair and credible electoral system. But finally, and most relevantly today, trust depends on transparency in political finance. Voters should know who funds our politics and trust that wealthy individuals, corporations or foreign interests cannot buy influence or access. With that in mind, will the government accept that a small number of extremely wealthy individuals now wield disproportionate influence over British politics? That includes overseas donors, which raises very serious questions around foreign interference. And at a recent Westminster Hall debate, members from across this House spoke out strongly on this matter. And finally, will the Secretary of State now commit to donation caps, something supported by voters across every major party? Thank you.
State.
Can I welcome the support from the Honourable Lady for the review. We've now had that support from all sides of the House, and I think that is appreciated. It's very important that the House of Commons stands united against the potential threats to our democracy from hostile foreign state actors. Our democracy is one of the most precious things we have, and it's important we all work together across the chamber to protect it. We are not targeting any particular states or individuals with this review. We are looking to confirm that the safeguards that protect our democracy from inappropriate or malign foreign financial interference are robust enough, and I look forward to Philip Rycroft's findings when we have them towards the end of March.
Sean Woodcock.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will be aware that the honourable member for Boston Skegness recently failed to declare on time hospitality in a French villa from the wife of the former Russian Deputy Finance Minister. Can my right honourable friend assure me that the offer and acceptance of gifts and free holidays from Russian oligarchs will be in the scope of this review?
Secretary of State.
I thank him for his question, and can I just preface my response by saying that the review is not looking at individual cases, but the broader issue of gifts and hospitality and how they may be used by malign or potentially malign foreign agents or state actors will be in scope for the independent review.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I hope the Rycroft review will take account of the fact that the giving of money is by no means the worst aspect or the main aspect of treacherous behaviour, because very often these people do what they do out of a genuine belief in a potential enemy's point of view, and it would be interesting to know whether the crime would have attracted such a large sentence as it did if, instead of just money being given, it had been a matter of clandestine contact because the person was willing to spout the Russian line anyway. So let us not be over concerned with the giving of the bribery, which is often a bonus to people who want to betray us to a potential enemy in any case.
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank him for his question. He makes a very important point, and indeed the Security Minister, who's sitting alongside me, is leading the Defending Democracy Task Force that will be taking a wider view of the threats to our democracy. As they evolve, then so too must our safeguards evolve to keep our democracy safe. Philip Rycroft's review will be focusing on malign foreign financial interference, given that we know from the Nathan Gill case that there may be weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and we want to make sure that our safeguards are as robust as they can possibly be.
Before I call the next member, can I just remind members that if they are going to seek to make a complaint about non-declaration of interest or the breaking of rules or conduct by another member, that would be an issue better raised with the Standards Commissioner than with the Secretary of State today. Equally, if they're going to refer to the conduct of another member, they should have informed them in advance. Andrew Cooper. Jeez, the honourable gentleman wasn't bobbing. Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's statement today and thank him for mentioning the forcible deportation of Ukrainian children by Russia. I recently coordinated a cross-party letter to the Minister of State ensuring that the human rights of those children were protected in peace negotiations. Does he share my concern that whilst that letter was supported by almost every party across this House, there was not a single representative from one party who sought to sign it, and that party was the Reform Party?
Well, I do commend and congratulate her on her campaigning for the kidnapped children of Ukraine, and you would really expect that representatives of all political parties would seek to support their interests in being returned back home to their parents and to their carers. Perhaps most shocking of all is that despite the widespread knowledge that that was going on, this individual chose to accept bribes from the government of Russia, responsible for those heinous activities, betraying his country into the bargain.
Woodley.
I'm curious to know in what respect our existing laws were insufficient to deal with this appalling case. And would he confirm that the best way to reassure the public on electoral resilience is never again to delay local council or mayoral elections?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm curious to know exactly the same thing, which is why I've appointed Philip Rycroft to lead an independent review so that we can find out.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this review and the fact that it is independent. It's really important this is seen to be above party politics because we must protect our democracy. It's very clear that it's fragile, it's under attack from foreign forces. But I just want to ask the Secretary of State about the terms of reference and whether this will involve looking at the role of social media companies, because there's no doubt that foreign state actors are absolutely using that as a vehicle to spread disinformation and undermine our democracy.
Secretary of State.
Well, it's an independent review, and the reviewer and his team will be able to look at whatever they think may be problematic relating to the core terms of reference, but the central part of those terms of reference are to focus on the potential malign foreign financial interference in UK politics. That may or may not have a bearing on the point that he raises.
Will Forster.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State is right to highlight the appalling case of a senior UK politician being convicted of bribery from taking money from Russia. I'm also concerned of a UK political party getting a donation, the largest single donation from a living person, from money abroad, from cryptocurrency. Can he assure me this independent review, which I welcome, will consider political donations and will potentially recommend where we set a political donation cap?
Secretary of State.
Well, he's absolutely right to raise concerns about cryptocurrency. There's no way of knowing for certain what the origins of that financing might be. And it does appear to be potentially a backdoor for malign foreign actors or states to seek to influence British democracy, and we can't allow that. It will be up to the independent reviewer to choose where he wishes to go with the investigation, but I'm sure he and other members of his party will make clear the points that he's just made in the House and that they will be fully considered.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to follow up on the question raised by my honourable friend for Ellesmere Port about social media. I do think this is really important, and I'll put it this way to the Secretary of State. If a foreign government funds third parties to post false comments on social media to mislead people exercising their democratic rights, surely that must come within the terms of the Rycroft review. Could he confirm that that's up to Philip Rycroft and he has the capacity to bring it within terms of the review, given that particular issue?
Secretary of State.
Yes, that's correct. What he just described is foreign financial attempts to influence our democracy, and that will be in scope for the review.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a former Elections Minister, can I welcome the Secretary of State's statement? And I wondered if he would reflect on 2 points together with his right honourable friend with regards to the Defending Democracy Task Force. The Electoral Commission has plenty of influence, possibly needs more financial resource and sharper teeth that it can deploy more quickly. Would he reflect on that and ask Sir Philip to advise on that point? And the response of our police across the country is at best patchy when it comes to their interpretation of how they define their key and pivotal role in defending democracy and ensuring that it works fairly and well for all of us. So through the task force, can he ensure that there's a more uniform approach from the police on this issue?
State.
Yes, I welcome his intervention. He makes very important observations. The role, resources and powers of the Electoral Commission will be in scope for the review, as will the role and enforcement powers of other agencies, including the police, if the reviewer sees fit to pursue that.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Chair of the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement into the case of Nathan Gill. There's nothing worse than the enemy within. It's quite clear that there are significant loopholes with the current system. Money is flooding in. In fact, we have taken evidence about cryptocurrencies on our committee as part of our Defending Democracy inquiry. Just interested to hear from the Minister about when the terms of reference will be published. Just to echo the points about media ownership and also social media, as has been commented on. But also just if the Secretary of State would appear before the JCNSS when we hold our inquiry in January and February.
State.
I'm always happy to receive invitations to appear before inquiries of that level of importance. The terms of reference will be laid in the House of Commons library today, may indeed already have been done so, and I refer to my comments earlier on social media.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much,
Madam Deputy Speaker. In terms of looking at the political finances, we are supportive of the review, and I thank the Secretary of State for bringing it to us today. The donations that are made to political parties are one thing, but donations that are made to either candidates or politicians are another thing, and it can be considered slightly differently. Would the Secretary of State confirm that this will be part of Rycroft's review, and that we will be looking specifically at donations that are outside that normal electoral cycle to main political parties?
State.
Well, first of all, can I welcome the Honourable Lady's support for the review. The circumstances she describes will be in scope. We need to be looking across the piece to ensure that the safeguards we have in place against foreign influence on our democracy are robust at all levels and all tiers and all elections.
Alan Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Secretary of State agree with me that this absolutely appalling case of a senior Reform politician being jailed for accepting Russian bribes shows that the corrupt Putin regime is not only cyber-attacking our national infrastructure, is not only interfering with our critical infrastructure under the sea with its shadow fleet, but is trying to attack the very heart of our democracy itself.
Yes.
So can the Secretary of State explain to the House how, when this review is concluded, the full powers and resources that might be recommended for the police, the security services and the other agencies that can protect our democracy will be provided?
State.
Well, I will be responding directly to the findings of the Commission when those are available at the end of March, and I will bring those responses back to the House of Commons. But I do agree with the point that he's making. The Russian dictatorship is clearly using malign information activity at scale to threaten the national security and integrity of democracies across the advanced democratic world, including here in the UK. And we need to understand, as the threat evolves, that our safeguards are evolving similarly to keep our democracy safe.
Mark Pritchard.
Can I welcome the Rycroft review? The Secretary of State in an earlier reply said that the role of the Electoral Commission will be in scope, and I think if that is the case, it does need involvement from opposition parties from across the House, which I think earlier in his statement he said that probably wouldn't happen. Whether it happens in the task force or perhaps more widely in the Defending Democracy task force, given that this case that he refers to, this shocking case, started off in the European Parliament, can I invite him and his ministerial colleagues to look at the role of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly on the Council of Europe, and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly? I believe I'm the only MP in history to have served on all three, not at the same time, I hasten to add. And of course, the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. All of those, I believe, in my experience, have been subject to at least very low-level Belarus or Russian influence operations.
Secretary of State.
I thank him for his question, not least because it gives me the opportunity to correct any misimpression. But the independent review will be engaging cross-party right across the House and will be hoping, indeed expecting to hear from all parties, members of all parties who have a view to share, because I am convinced that all of us in all parties want to ensure that we can defend our democracy against malign foreign interference, whether that is from Russia or from anywhere else.
Rosie Writing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Secretary of State for coming here and sending a clear message that attacks on our democracy will not win. This government won't let it happen, and the British people won't let it happen. My right honourable friend might be aware that the BBC sought to question the former leader of UKIP in Scotland, who also made pro-Russian interventions in the European Parliament at the same time as Gill, and he refused to answer their questions. So with that in mind, can my right honourable friend assure me that this review will have the resources they need to leave no stone unturned when examining Russian interference in our political system?
State.
Thank her for her question, and I agree with her. Our democracy is one of the most precious things we have in our country, and we all need to do absolutely everything in our power to protect it. The resources will be made available to the independent review coming from my departmental budgets. We will hear from the reviewer himself exactly how he sees the review moving forward, and I will make sure that it has appropriate resourcing to carry out the functions that the House of Commons is asking of it.
Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Members from across this House expressed their deep concerns on this issue in the backbench committee debate led by my Liberal Democrat colleague, the member for Lewis, on foreign influence last Thursday. So I am very glad that the government has taken this step today. There is clear evidence that other leaders of UKIP and Reform UK also associated with Nathan Gill's Russian handlers. There is also evidence laid out, albeit in redacted form, in the Russia report of the Intelligence and Security Committee of Russian money seeking to influence other parties and elections. So can the Secretary of State confirm that the review will be free to look back as far as it needs to inform its recommendations, including the referendums of 2014 and 2016, and that it will be free to publish its findings without ministerial censorship?
Secretary of State.
Well, the review will certainly have the freedom to be fully independent, because that is important if we're to have confidence in the findings, but it will be forward-looking. There will be no relitigating of previous elections, although we know, not least from the Nathan Gill case, that there have been attempts by malign foreign actors to interfere in British democracy. There have been no findings that the outcomes of any elections to date were affected by malign foreign interference. The point of this review is to ensure that moving forwards we maintain safeguards robust enough to protect future elections from malign foreign interference.
Daniel Francis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to echo the comments from colleagues regarding social media sites. In Bexley and Crayford, we've seen more and more examples of anonymous users on Facebook particularly spreading disinformation, not just at election time, but also to undermine trust and faith in public bodies outside of election time. So as well as the review, can I ask the Secretary of State to give us assurances about how we can continue to work with colleagues across government to look at those issues and how foreign interference is playing its part in it?
Well, he speaks to a very real threat, not just to our democracy, but to our national security. From foreign financial interference. You know, we're all aware of so-called bots and the role that they seek to play in influencing the views of electors in elections. That is a function of foreign financial interference, and it will be in scope for the review.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The irony of hearing the Secretary of State talk about protecting democracy a week after cancelling mayoral elections will not be lost on millions of British voters. But nevertheless, we welcome this review, of course. And can the Secretary of State confirm? Can the Secretary of State confirm that it will also cover the influence of the Chinese communist regime into the Labour Party, where a senior MP allegedly received hundreds of thousands of pounds of donations from a potential Chinese spy? A Labour government that gave away our valuable strategic Chagos Islands. A Labour government that was responsible for the Chinese spy case collapse. And a Labour government that is kowtowing to China over the mega embassy.
Well, the leader of Reform UK, when asked to conduct an internal review into the Gill matter, of course refused to carry one out. But he did say, to give him credit, that he would welcome a review by the government into these matters. So I was disappointed that the honourable gentleman didn't welcome the review that we're discussing in the House today. All, just to be clear, all potential sources of malign foreign financial interference are in scope for this review. And if the review finds failings in any political party, then I expect the leaders of other political parties, as of my own leader, to put the country first and their party second.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's comments on social media, and I hope that we can meet with the Elections Minister ahead of the publications of the bill to see what we can do for those protections. I wanted to raise, particularly in this review that he's announced today, which is a very, very good one, the money that is coming into this country, particularly around changing our politics around abortion rights, trans rights, and other areas. Is that within scope of the review?
Thank you for a question, and I'm sure my colleague, the Elections Minister, would be delighted to meet with her to discuss her concerns. The review will be looking at any foreign financial interference in our democracy, so I would expect the point she raises to be in scope.
Lisa Smart.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the Secretary of State's statement today on the establishment of the independent review, and I also agree with colleagues across the House who've talked about the importance of the resilience of our democracy, but also its current fragility. I note that the Secretary of State doesn't seem keen to give us too many spoilers of what to expect in the elections bill in the new year, but I want to follow on from my colleague on the Speaker's Committee on the Electoral Commission, the Chair of the Select Committee, and my honourable friend, the member for Guildford's questions, just to see if the Secretary of State would confirm whether, if the review recommends a cap on donations, or if the review recommends restoring the independence of the Electoral Commission, would they be things he'd support?
I thank her for her question. We certainly understand the risks posed to elections, and in the elections bill, as we published in the strategy in July, we will seek to strengthen the rules around donations to political parties for that reason. The findings of the independent review will inform what is in the elections bill.
Terry Jeremy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the statement and the leadership that the Secretary of State is showing on this issue. Our democracy is important and requires our active protection, but does the Secretary of State agree with me, as well as the actions the government can take, there is still far more that individual political parties, particularly Reform UK, can do around due diligence and vetting procedures to stop people being elected, because we continue to see too many people up and down the country, once they're into office, horror stories coming out that should have been stopped in advance.
State.
Well, I certainly agree with the points he's making about due diligence, and one of the issues we'll be looking at as a government, no secret this, but we need to look at standards in public life. The Prime Minister has already made some changes in the code of conduct that affects all of us as members of Parliament, but I think that we need to look further at how we can strengthen standards across local government as well, which were weakened, unfortunately, by the previous government.
Anne Davies.
Madam Llefarydd. Following the sentencing of the former Reform Wales leader for taking bribes to peddle pro-Russian propaganda, we welcome this review. Thank you. But Plaid Cymru, as you remember from Liz Saville-Roberts' PMQ, has been calling for...
The Honourable Lady will know that we don't refer to other honourable members by name, but by their constituency. Anne Davies.
I apologise. But Plaid Cymru has been calling for action in Westminster and the Senedd for months, only to be repeatedly dismissed by this Labour government, which even left it to Reform's own leader to police his party. Unfortunately, because of the government's delay, there is now no time to implement reforms before the 2026 Senedd elections. Will the Minister set out exactly what steps are being taken to protect Welsh democracy from foreign interference before next year?
Secretary of State.
Thank you for a question. I mean, safeguards are already in place, of course, but the fact that the review will report in March means it will come ahead of the elections, and that is because not only members of this House, but voters across the country will want to know that the safeguards against malign foreign financial interference into the coming elections are sufficiently robust to make sure that they are free and they are fair.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Chair of the Fair Elections APG, I warmly welcome this independent review into foreign financial interference in UK politics. Foreign financial interference, however, is not the only threat to our electoral resilience. Misinformation, disinformation, the electoral system itself are all part of the flaws in the electoral system. Will these issues also be in scope for the Elections Democracy Bill that is coming next year?
Secretary of State.
Well, the terms of reference will be laid in the House of Commons library today, but this is not the only way that we are looking at the security and the integrity of our elections. My colleague, the Minister for Security, is leading the Defending Democracy Task Force, which is looking more widely at action that we may need to take to ensure that our safeguards remain robust to the against the changing nature of the threat to our democracy.
That's law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, of course, the appalling crime carried out by Nathan Gill with a £40,000 bribe to speak about Russia is not unique, although the bribe is the one we know. 8 other members of the Reform Party also piloted pro-Russian narratives, sometimes line by line, word by word. The 2 questions I wish to ask is, given the timelines at the end of March, if there are parts of which are not robust in our elections, are you going to bring about legislation before May? And secondly, given that loopholes are already being exploited, particularly on monies entering this country, will you be applying retrospectively?
Secretary of State.
I can't anticipate what's going to be in the review, so we have to give Philip Rycroft and his team time to make their recommendations, and then we will consider them and the level of the threats that he may identify that we're as yet unaware of. I can't comment on individual cases. I'm sure he will understand. That will be a matter for the police, and if there are further prosecutions to be made, then I'm sure the police will carry that forward.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russia is attacking every aspect of our state. It is attacking our industries, it is attacking our infrastructure, and it is attacking our way of life. And, as we have seen in the treacherous actions of a Reform politician outside of this place, it is attacking the underpinning democracy that holds us together. Whilst I welcome the steps and the leadership that the Secretary of State has announced, this must be a wake-up call across government. Can the Secretary of State set out what steps he is taking to encourage similarly strong approaches and leadership to countering Russian malign activity from other government departments?
Well, I mean, he's absolutely right. It is a cornerstone of Russia's international strategy to threaten the national security and the integrity of democracies, the UK and our partners overseas. We know that. What we are seeking to check is that our safeguards against that evolving threat are sufficiently robust to keep our democracy safe. This will be an approach that will be supported by departments right across government. The Security Minister is leading the Defending Democracy Task Force, and he's already published the Counter-Political Interference and Espionage Action Plan, which calls on ministers right across government to collaborate together to ensure that we are making the safeguards he's calling for sufficiently robust.
Andrew George.
Deputy Speaker, although it may seem a little tangential, I wonder whether the following could be in scope for this investigation. And that is the way in which those people in this country, hundreds of thousands, who work for 20, 30, 40 years paying taxes in this country are unable to influence the outcomes of elections because they have an EU passport, whereas there are hundreds of thousands of expats who never set foot in this country for decades and decades, and yet they have an influence on the outcome of elections, and indeed unscrupulous parties could hoover them up and direct them towards marginal seats, thus influencing the outcome of the election itself. So would the Secretary of State, either with this or with the electoral bill, please address this issue?
Well, he makes this point clearly and eloquently, but he's right. It is somewhat tangential to the review that Philip Rycroft will be leading. That would be looking at malign foreign financial interference, but he should be reassured that no stone will be left unturned in seeking to protect our democracy. It's one of the most precious things we have.
Mahenda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can my right honourable friend give a clear assurance to my constituents of Portsmouth North that the police have all the resources they need to pursue all remaining leads in the Gill case? And, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this review will examine the full extent of Russian interference in our country's politics and democracy, including any influence exerted through government contracts or strategic infrastructure projects.
She makes a very important point, and yes, of course, the police have the resources they require to pursue any lines of inquiry arising from associates of Nathan Gill, but not only that case, and not only in that political party. It's very important that the independent inquiry that we're launching today operates cross-party in the interests of our democracy and everybody who holds that democracy as dear as I'm sure all members across the House do.
Speaker, those of us who have been targeted by Russia, and there are a number of us in this chamber, will have been particularly horrified by the crimes of the former Reform leader in Wales. I have to say I'm particularly pleased to see Philip Rycroft being appointed. We know he's been a fine public servant. We also know his deep experience of Europe and also Northern Ireland. And to that extent, can he absolutely assure us that the EU referendum will absolutely be in scope? I think I'm getting heckled by Reform. Today of all days, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Well, as I said earlier, we're not seeking to relitigate the past. There has been no evidence that the outcome of any previous election or referendum was affected by any attempted foreign interference. We're seeking to make sure that the safeguards we have in place against any threats to our democracy from malign foreign actors seeking to use finance to influence voters' choices in those elections and the outcomes of those elections are robust enough to keep us safe. I welcome his support for Philip Rycroft's appointments. For me, one of the important aspects of his appointment is he has no party political affiliation whatsoever.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some in Reform have suggested that their former leader in Wales, the traitor Nathan Gill, and he was a traitor, was just one bad apple. Yet, however, we've learned in recent weeks that there are at least 8 MEPs that used to represent either UKIP or the Brexit Party that were approached by Gill at the behest of his Russian paymasters. What is it about parties led by the former member of honourable member for Clacton that makes them uniquely susceptible to Russian bribes? And could it be that they're already the apologists for Putin?
Before I call the Secretary of State, can I entreat the honourable member? I'm sure he'll have mentioned it to the honourable member for Clacton that he was going to reference him in the House.
I reference his party, not him.
I think you'll find that you use the term the honourable member for Clacton. You wish to argue back to the Chair. Secretary of State.
Thank you. Well, I won't be tempted to comment on any individual cases. What we're seeking to do is to ensure that safeguards against foreign financial interference in the round are sufficiently robust.
Mr. Speaker, I warmly welcome the review announced today by the Secretary of State. And he's right to talk about the importance of upholding the integrity of our democracy. But it's not just about malign foreign interference, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's also about things that are said in this place. One of the greatest threats to our democracy is the willful spreading of misinformation by prominent politicians. But the Secretary of State is not without fault in this regard, Madam Deputy Speaker. He repeatedly, incorrectly, claimed that Scotland's water quality is lower than England's. In fact, it is significantly higher, something I pointed out during a debate and a point of order in this chamber. So even when the Secretary of State, when this was pointed out by the Statistics Authority, he refused to apologise. Will he take the opportunity now, in light of the fact that our conduct and social media posts are now within scope of the review?
Well, I know he didn't like the facts when I made them clear in this House, but the review is about malign foreign financial interference in our democracy, not points that he doesn't like.
Alex Barros-Curtis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable
financial interference in our democracy, not points that he doesn't like.
Alex Barros-Curtis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for announcing this review, which I fully welcome. Does he agree with me that every political party should welcome it, unless they've got something to hide? Yeah. And will he tell me also whether the terms of reference of Philip Rycroft's independent investigation will require every political party to cooperate? And if they don't, will he name and shame them so that the public can render their judgment accordingly?
I thank you for his question. The review will not have the powers to compel people to submit evidence. But like him, my view is that members from every single political party represented in this House will want to ensure that the Russian state is not using dirty money to influence and interfere in our democratic processes. I would be shocked if any political party doesn't subscribe to that view, because it's what underpins the freedom of our democracy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd just like to start by saying I'm really disappointed that none of the Reform MPs who were here at the start, most have gone now, took the opportunity to utterly condemn Nathan Gill's treacherous acts. Absolutely, we should all be condemning what he did. He's an absolute traitor to our country. But I'm pleased that the Secretary of State has taken seriously his duties to build and protect faith in our democracy. So you'll be pleased to hear I've recently visited a few high schools in my constituency, Forrester, Firhill, Tynecastle, Boroughmuir and Balerno, to talk about our democracy and talk about opportunities for them to actually come here to see it actually at work. The three most common topics they want to talk about is bobbing. I give them a demonstration, of course. The second is smartphone bans that may or may not be coming towards them. But the third is our electoral system, proportional representation. Now, so I know the Secretary of State takes seriously his role in protecting and modernising it. So will he listen to our young people when doing so?
Well, I can people to this House, it's very important that young people get to see their democracy in action. I'm sure they, like all of us who are older, want to get dirty money out of British politics, and that is what this review is intended to achieve.
Collins. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a member of the Fair Elections APPG, I very much welcome the independent review into foreign financial interference into our democracy. So does the Secretary of State share my concern about the inadequate oversight of potentially foreign donations, particularly monies funnelled through cryptocurrency, and the potential for malign actors to seek to influence our democracy through crypto donations?
She makes a very important point. Cryptocurrency is one of the routes by which dirty money is able to covertly enter British politics in an attempt to influence the outcomes of elections. That is why crypto will be in scope for this review, and I look forward, as I know she does, to the findings of Philip Rycroft's review.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A once senior leader of the Reform Party is now in jail for colluding with Russia.
Where he belongs.
And when the honourable member for Clacton heard about this, did he launch an inquiry? Did he perhaps review his own previous statements on Russia, including saying that he admired Putin? No, he did not. He called Nathan Gill a bad apple. So I welcome this review. I welcome the fact that all political parties will be invited to contribute. But can I press my right honourable friend to commit to making it clear to this House when he comes back and reports on the findings of this review exactly which political parties took part in this exercise of scrutiny and transparency and which do not?
Can I just confirm with the honourable member that he did inform the honourable member for Clacton?
I'm pleased to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did. He's not in his place to hear my comments, but I hope he is listening anyway.
It will be for Philip Rycroft to publish his review in the way that he sees fit, but my honourable friend is absolutely right. The sentencing of Nathan Gill for bribery, alongside other recent cases, has exposed vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the UK's political and electoral systems. And the review will give us the opportunity to check that our safeguards are sufficiently robust given the evolving nature of the threat.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I, like others, thank the Secretary of State for his robust defence of elections and our democracy through his statement. On the Gill case, he may be aware that the Reform Board member Gawain Towler is on record as saying that he realised very quickly that Nathan Gill was raising pro-Russia questions about Ukraine in 2018, but after confronting Gill, he then simply, quote, accepted his explanation at face value and was, by his own admission, foolish. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that it can't be good enough for any political party to simply accept peddling of pro-Russian propaganda, and can he assure me that this review will examine all and every link with Russia without fear or favour?
Absolutely, the review will operate without fear or favour. It will involve an in-depth assessment of the current financial and bribery-related rules and safeguards that regulate all political parties and political finance, so we can ensure our democracy remains safe in the decades to come.
Last but by no means least, Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement today? This case should be of a concern to anybody who believes in this country and believes in our democracy, which should be everybody in this chamber today. Can I ask the Secretary of State what he will do to ensure, and working with the Home Secretary, that police forces like mine in Essex, which cover my constituency of Harlow, are equipped to deal with any local investigations should the need arise?
Well, I have by my side the Security Minister who chairs the Defending Democracy Task Force. He's of course located in the Home Office, and I'm sure he'll have heard the Honourable Gentleman's comments, but I agree with him. Our democracy is too precious to allow dirty money from overseas to destroy it. And I hope the whole House will come together to do what is necessary to protect something as vital and precious as our freedom to choose our own governments.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement this afternoon? I will allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over. And can I urge all members who are leaving the chamber to do so quickly and quietly? Which brings us to a statement on planning reform. Minister Matthew Pennycook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to make a statement on the Government's ongoing efforts to overhaul the planning system. As the House is fully aware, England remains in the grip of an acute and entrenched housing crisis. It is a crisis, first and foremost, that is blighting countless lives, not least those of the more than 170,000 homeless children living in temporary accommodation today. But it is also hampering economic growth and productivity